Hina is completely unaware of how strange her future is about to become as Hunter Kong Jinhyun suddenly gets down on one knee in front of her and declares that he will give her everything he has. The unexpected gesture leaves her nervous and slightly flushed, especially when she realizes that he is holding out his house card key as though he is making a serious proposal. Jinhyun then makes his strange intention clear by asking Hina to take responsibility for his house and become his housekeeper. Hina is completely taken aback by the unusual request and cannot understand why a powerful hunter like Kong Jinhyun would ask her to become his housekeeper in such an absurd and dramatic manner. Her confusion is only the beginning of the story, because roughly 10 years earlier, the world had experienced an event that completely changed the course of human history. Dungeons suddenly appeared all over the world, bringing about an unprecedented transformation that affected every part of human society. People who had never encountered anything supernatural in their ordinary lives suddenly found themselves facing mysterious gates and terrifying creatures emerging from them. At first, nobody understood what was happening. People looked toward the sky with worried expressions whenever they sensed something unusual, wondering what could possibly be moving above them and why the world had suddenly become so strange. Then the monsters began appearing in greater numbers. Countless creatures poured out from the dungeons and immediately began hunting human beings without mercy. The monsters attacked cities, streets, and populated areas, turning ordinary places into scenes of complete chaos. Humanity had no idea how to fight back at first, and countless civilians were forced to run, hide, and desperately search for somewhere safe. People screamed warnings to one another as they tried to escape the creatures, urging everyone around them to move faster and get away. Massive monsters towered over the crowds, creating an overwhelming sense of terror as people fled in every direction. The creatures seemed almost impossible to stop, and for a time, humanity appeared completely helpless against them. The world was pushed toward the brink of extinction as the monster attacks continued and the number of casualties continued to rise. Just when it seemed as though humanity might actually be wiped out, something completely unexpected happened. Awakeners began appearing among ordinary human beings. These newly awakened individuals possessed extraordinary supernatural abilities that allowed them to fight against the monsters on a completely different level. They quickly began confronting the creatures emerging from the dungeons and used their powerful abilities to defeat them. Thanks to the strength and sacrifices of the Awakeners, the world that had descended into complete chaos gradually began to stabilize. Humanity finally had people capable of fighting the monsters, and civilization slowly started rebuilding itself around this new reality. However, the appearance of Awakeners did not make the dungeons disappear. The mysterious gates remained scattered throughout the world, continuing to produce monsters and presenting an ongoing threat to humanity. Because of this, Awakeners and the guilds that organized and supported them became an important pillar of modern society. Among the Awakeners, hunters became especially famous. These individuals entered dangerous dungeons, fought terrifying monsters, and risked their lives in exchange for fame, wealth, and enormous financial rewards. Some hunters became celebrities, while others became national heroes whose names were known by almost everyone. Their incredible abilities and dangerous lifestyles fascinated ordinary civilians, and many people dreamed of becoming hunters themselves. Yet for Hina, this entire world had always seemed completely unrelated to her life. She was simply an ordinary office worker who spent her days sitting at a desk, completing endless assignments, answering work-related requests, and staying late at the office whenever her workload became too large. The world of dungeons and hunters had always existed somewhere far away from her ordinary routine. At least, that had been the case until only a few seconds earlier. Everything changed when a strange window suddenly appeared on her computer screen. Hina stared at it in complete confusion, unable to understand what she was looking at. The screen congratulated her on awakening and informed her that she had opened her eyes to new abilities. She immediately wondered whether exhaustion had finally caused her to hallucinate. After all, she had been working overtime for 3 consecutive days, barely getting enough sleep and spending far too many hours staring at her computer. She rubbed her eyes repeatedly, hoping that the strange message would disappear once her vision cleared. Instead, the window remained exactly where it was. Hina became increasingly unsettled as she tried to determine whether she was actually looking at a system window or whether her exhausted mind had somehow created it. The idea that she had awakened seemed completely absurd. She had never experienced anything unusual before, and there had been no warning that something like this could happen to her. Yet the message was still displayed directly in front of her, making it impossible to dismiss as an illusion. Hina began wondering what awakening actually meant and why it had suddenly happened to her out of nowhere. She was confused and nervous, but one thing was certain. She had not imagined what she saw. The strange system window was real. Her confusion eventually caught the attention of someone else in the office. The chief noticed Hina's unusual expression and asked whether something was wrong, wondering if she had accidentally lost some of the important data she was working on. Hina immediately became alarmed by the suggestion because losing work data was one of the worst things that could happen to an office worker who had already spent days working overtime. She quickly assured the chief that nothing had happened to the data and asked her not to say something so frightening. The chief then noticed how terrified Hina looked and admitted that Hina's expression had actually scared her as well. After hesitating for a moment, Hina finally revealed that she had awakened. The chief's surprise quickly turned into excitement. She had never personally witnessed someone awakening before and could hardly believe that she was sitting beside an actual newly awakened person. Her curiosity immediately exploded, and she began bombarding Hina with questions about what awakening was like. She wanted to know whether the system really appeared like a window in a video game, what kind of job Hina would receive, whether her statistics were high, what her abilities were, and what kind of awakener she might become. Hina could barely keep up with the questions as the chief became more and more fascinated by the situation. Meanwhile, Hina continued reading the information displayed by the system. The message explained that the system would analyze her talents and luck before searching for the job type most suitable for her. It also warned that the process could take a considerable amount of time. Hina watched the status carefully and realized that the system was still searching. The chief naturally assumed that Hina would probably become a hunter because more than 80% of awakeners reportedly awaken as offensive types. She even congratulated Hina in advance and suggested that she might become extremely wealthy if she received a high rank. Hina could not help feeling hopeful at the possibility, but she also understood that becoming a hunter did not automatically guarantee success. Everything depended on the rank she received. High-ranking hunters could become incredibly wealthy, but D and F class hunters had very different lives. Hina immediately thought about her older brother. Appa had awakened as a D-class hunter, and despite his low rank, he still entered dangerous dungeons because he wanted to provide for her. Hina could not help thinking that if he had only awakened as a D-class hunter, perhaps he would have been better off remaining an ordinary office worker. She had no idea where he was at that moment or which dungeon he had entered. There had been no news from him, and the uncertainty continued to weigh heavily on her. She desperately hoped that he would return safely. While she was still waiting for the system to determine her class, the chief checked on her again and asked whether her class had finally appeared. Hina looked at the screen and confirmed that it had not. Even after more time passed, the system continued searching. The chief became increasingly frustrated by how slow the process was and compared it to Hina's notoriously terrible office computer. At this rate, she joked that Hina might have to stay up all night waiting for the system to finish. Eventually, the chief decided that it was time to go home. She gathered her belongings and prepared to leave, but first asked Hina whether she planned to leave as well. Hina explained that she only wanted to finish a little more work before going home and encouraged the chief to leave first. Before leaving, the chief jokingly reminded Hina that once she became an S-class hunter, she should still remember her colleagues and act as though she knew them. She then said goodbye and left the office. Hina promised to see her the next day and remained behind alone. Once the chief was gone, the office became completely silent. Hina sat alone in her chair and looked at the enormous amount of work still waiting for her. Despite having just awakened as an awakener, nothing about her workload had changed. Awakening was not going to magically complete her unfinished assignments, so she decided that she might as well finish them herself. She had heard that awakeners generally possessed better stamina than ordinary civilians, so she hoped that her newly awakened body might at least make working overtime slightly easier. Even after receiving a supernatural awakening, her immediate concern was still her job. Hina could hardly believe that the first practical benefit she was thinking about was being able to work longer hours without becoming exhausted. It felt like an extremely harsh reminder of reality. She could not believe that work was still the only thing occupying her mind. The amount of work never seemed to decrease regardless of how much she completed, and her frustration toward the company continued building. She began wishing that the company would simply go bankrupt and disappear. Almost immediately after that thought crossed her mind, a tremendous boom shook the entire building. Hina was startled by the sudden explosion of noise and wondered whether an earthquake had struck. She immediately regretted wishing for the company to go bankrupt and mentally insisted that she had not actually meant it. Her first instinct was to hide, so she quickly crawled underneath the table for protection. In her panic, she accidentally slammed her head against the underside of the desk and cried out in pain. Before she could recover, she noticed an extremely bright light appearing around her. The light was so intense that it hurt her eyes, and she immediately realized that it did not look like ordinary lightning. A terrifying possibility entered her mind, and she desperately hoped that it was not what she thought it was. The light suddenly became overwhelming, completely surrounding her as she squeezed her eyes shut. When Hina finally opened them again, she discovered that she was no longer inside the office. She found herself standing in an unfamiliar forest surrounded by trees and dense vegetation. For several seconds, she could only stare at her surroundings in disbelief before finally recognizing what had happened. She had been swept into a dungeon. Hina had always seen stories about civilians being caught up in dungeon gates on the news, but she had never imagined that she would actually become one of those people. The odds of being randomly swept into a dungeon were incredibly low, supposedly even lower than the chance of being struck by lightning. Yet somehow, it had happened to her. She could not understand why she had been chosen for such a terrifying situation. Her luck had never been good enough to win a lottery jackpot, and yet she had somehow managed to experience something far rarer and far more dangerous. She had been working overtime only moments ago, and now she was standing inside a dungeon surrounded by an unknown environment. Hina immediately began worrying about the rescue operation. Since it was still dawn, she assumed that the hunter mobilization would take some time. She wondered whether she could survive until the rescue team arrived. Her fear became overwhelming as she thought about her older brother and desperately wished that he were there to help her. She did not want to die inside an unfamiliar dungeon. Just when her panic was reaching its peak, the system window appeared again. It announced that the search for her suitable job class had finally been completed. Hina immediately remembered that she had awakened only moments earlier. If the system had finally finished searching, then perhaps there was still a chance that she had received an ability powerful enough to survive. She became desperate and began praying for the strongest possible fighting type class. In her desperation, she called upon God, Buddha, and Allah, begging for some kind of powerful combat ability that would allow her to escape the dungeon alive. She dropped to the ground and pleaded for a strong fighting type class, hoping that the system would grant her something capable of protecting her from the monsters that might appear at any moment. She desperately wished for a powerful ability, preferably one strong enough to completely overwhelm whatever creatures she encountered. For a brief moment, hope filled her heart as she waited for the result. Then the system banner changed. A congratulatory message appeared directly before her eyes, revealing the result of her awakening. Instead of becoming a warrior, mage, summoner, or another powerful combat class, Hina had awakened as a hidden class. Her new class was Housekeeper. The system had congratulated her on awakening as a hidden class and revealed that her new class was Housekeeper. At the time, Hina could barely believe what she was seeing. She had expected a powerful combat-related ability that might allow her to survive dangerous dungeons, yet the system had instead assigned her the class of Housekeeper. She had no idea what kind of class that was supposed to be or why she had received it of all possible choices. The system had simply identified her class as Housekeeper and her rank as D, explaining that she could manage a home through her great skills. Hina had immediately been frustrated by the result. She had never asked for a Housekeeper class, especially because she did not even understand what the class was supposed to do. To make matters worse, it was only a D-ranked class. She had been hoping for something capable of fighting monsters, and instead she had received an ability focused on managing a household. She desperately hopes that her statistics might at least compensate for the disappointing class. The status window appears and displays all of her basic information. Her name is Hina, her age is 25, her class is Housekeeper, and her rank is D. Her stamina is only 8, her magic is 1, her strength is 5, her agility is 6, her endurance is 20, and her luck is 45. Hina stares at the numbers in complete disbelief. She knows that even the combined statistics of high-ranking F-class awakeners can exceed 30, yet her own combined basic stats barely reach 19. She cannot understand how she is supposed to survive as an awakener when she is not even capable of reaching 20 total points. The only statistic that seems remotely impressive is luck, which stands at an absurdly high 45. Hina remembers that her Appa once told her that luck was considered a relatively useless statistic because it was not something a person could visibly see or directly rely on in combat. That makes the situation even more confusing. The one statistic that supposedly cannot be seen or used directly is the only number that is actually high. Hina has absolutely no idea whether she should laugh, cry, or simply accept that the system has somehow decided to make her life as difficult as possible. Before she can think about her terrible statistics any further, however, something suddenly moves behind her. A massive creature emerges from the trees, instantly freezing Hina in place. She turns around and sees an enormous dinosaur-like monster standing behind her. The creature opens its gigantic mouth and releases a terrifying roar that makes the surrounding area feel as though it is shaking. Hina's eyes widen in pure panic as the monster begins moving toward her. She immediately turns around and runs for her life, pushing her body as hard as she possibly can despite her terrible physical statistics. She desperately tries to put as much distance between herself and the creature as possible, but she already knows that the situation is almost hopeless. There is no realistic way for someone with an agility stat of only 6 to outrun a gigantic monster. Even if her agility were somehow 300, she doubts that she could escape such a terrifying creature. Her legs become heavier with every step, her breathing grows increasingly painful, and she realizes that she is rapidly running out of stamina. The difference between her physical abilities and those of the monster is simply too enormous. She cannot fight it, and she cannot outrun it. If she continues running in a straight line, she knows that she will eventually be caught and eaten alive. Just as her panic reaches its peak, Hina's eyes suddenly land on something ahead of her. She notices a swamp. It looks disgusting, dangerous, and potentially even more frightening than the creature chasing her, but she has no other option. At this point, entering the swamp seems better than being eaten. Hina immediately changes direction and jumps into the swamp without hesitation. The dinosaur reaches the edge and stops, apparently confused by the sudden disappearance of its prey. Hina carefully looks back and notices that the creature has not followed her inside. For the first time in several moments, she feels a tiny sense of relief. She realizes that perhaps the monster cannot enter the swamp after all. However, her relief does not last long. The dinosaur begins moving closer to the water, forcing Hina to keep moving deeper into the swamp. She struggles to swim through the thick, difficult water, using every bit of strength remaining in her body to push herself forward. The swamp makes movement extremely difficult, and her already low agility makes the situation even worse. She feels as though every movement requires an enormous amount of effort. The dinosaur eventually enters the swamp behind her and continues pursuing her through the water. Hina becomes terrified all over again as she hears the creature approaching from behind. She knows that she is almost out of option. Her stamina is already nearly depleted, and there is nowhere else for her to run. The dinosaur continues closing the distance between them until it is almost directly behind her. Hina believes that she is about to die when the massive creature opens its jaws and prepares to attack. At that exact moment, another enormous creature suddenly emerges from beneath the water. The second monster attacks the dinosaur before it can reach Hina, causing the two gigantic creatures to collide violently in the swamp. The sudden battle gives Hina the opportunity she desperately needs. She does not waste even a second thinking about what caused the creatures to fight. She immediately turns around and swims away as quickly as possible, using every remaining ounce of energy in her exhausted body to escape the battle. She continues moving until she finally reaches the edge of the swamp and manages to crawl out. Hina lies there for a moment, barely able to believe that she is still alive. Somehow, against all odds, she has survived another encounter with a terrifying monster. She begins wondering whether her ridiculously high luck statistic really did play some role in her survival. After all, there is no other reasonable explanation for how she managed to escape. Her body feels incredibly sluggish, and she can barely move after everything that has happened. She realizes that she only survived by the narrowest possible margin. Completely exhausted, covered in mud and water, and struggling to breathe properly, Hina decides that her immediate priority is finding somewhere safe to hide until the rescue team arrives. She carefully looks around the area and searches for something that might provide shelter. While doing so, she remembers that she has not even had the opportunity to properly examine the skills given to her by the housekeeper class. She had been too busy running for her life to check what abilities she actually possessed. Now that she has escaped the immediate danger, she opens her skill window and begins examining the available abilities. One particular skill immediately catches her attention. Comfortable Bed is listed as a D-ranked active skill that allows her to create a comfortable bed where she can enjoy a safe and quiet rest without interference from other beings. Hina immediately focuses on the word safe. After everything she has just experienced, the idea of having a place where she can safely rest sounds almost miraculous. She realizes that this might actually be useful in a dungeon, even if it does not help her fight monsters directly. However, the system immediately adds another requirement. Hina needs to find a suitable place to lie down and gather appropriate materials to make the bed herself. She stares at the instructions in disbelief because she had expected the skill to simply create a bed automatically. Instead, the system seems to expect her to do most of the work herself. She has no idea how she is supposed to determine which materials are suitable, especially because she knows almost nothing about the plants surrounding her. She looks around at the vegetation and wonders whether the materials can simply be gathered from the plants nearby. Just then, another system notification appears. Her passive skill plucking herbs, currently ranked C, has automatically activated. Hina looks at her hands and then at the plants around her with renewed interest. If the skill can identify plants, perhaps she can use it to gather the materials needed for the comfortable bed. She wonders whether simply pulling plants from the ground while avoiding poisonous herbs might be enough. Since she has nothing else to lose, she decides to test the theory. Hina reaches down and begins pulling plants from the ground one after another. Almost immediately, the system starts responding to her actions. A notification informs her that the mastery of plucking herbs is rising very rapidly. Hina is surprised by how quickly the number begins increasing, but she continues gathering plants. Another notification appears, informing her that the mastery of plucking herbs is rising rapidly. The message continues appearing repeatedly as she keeps pulling plants, and her mastery rises at an astonishing speed. Before long, another banner appears and congratulates her on raising plucking herbs to rank B. Hina looks at the notification with surprise and then examines the pile of plants she has gathered. She feels that she has probably collected enough materials to attempt the comfortable bed skill. She decides to proceed and focuses on the next set of instructions. The system explains that she needs to weave the plants together to create bedding and then place the softer plants over the bedding to complete the bed. Hina looks at the instructions with a strange expression because the explanation sounds simple but leaves almost all of the actual work to her. The skill is essentially a complete DIY project. She has to gather the materials, figure out how to weave them together, and somehow create something comfortable enough to sleep on. Hina begins thinking about gypsum, traditional Korean sandals made by weaving straw together. The concept reminds her of the way that plants might need to be woven for the bed, but knowing what gypsum are does not mean she actually knows how to make them. She has never made gypsum before, so she has no practical experience with weaving straw or plants into anything. Nevertheless, she begins following the system's instructions and somehow manages to weave the gathered plants together. The process feels strangely natural despite her complete lack of experience. Hina slowly begins to realize that the skill itself may be guiding her movements. She becomes fascinated by the possibility that this is the actual power of her housekeeper abilities. Even though she has never learned how to make anything like this, her hands seem to know what to do once the skill is activated. The bedding gradually takes shape, and after a little more effort, Hina finally completes it. She looks at the finished bed with relief and amazement, unable to believe that she has managed to create a usable sleeping space in the middle of a dangerous dungeon. She carefully lowers herself onto the bed and decides to check whether the skill worked properly. The system immediately displays the results. The comfortable bed has been made from edible plants and is ranked D. Its effect provides a 20% increase in recovery rate. Because the bed is made from edible plants, it can also resolve hunger and fatigue simultaneously. Hina's eyes widen as she reads the explanation. The skill is far more useful than she initially expected. Not only can the bed provide a safe place to rest, but it can also reduce hunger and fatigue at the same time. She realizes that the seemingly ridiculous housekeeper class might actually contain some surprisingly powerful survival abilities. She had already been considering pulling edible plants because she was hungry, and now the bed itself can apparently help with that problem. For the first time since entering the dungeon, Hina feels that she might actually be able to relax. She settles onto the soft bedding and allows her exhausted body to sink into it. However, her peaceful moment lasts only a short while before a strange hissing sound reaches her ears. Hina immediately opens her eyes and looks around, trying to determine where the sound is coming from. A gigantic snake suddenly appears nearby. Its enormous body coils through the vegetation as it moves toward her, and its terrifying appearance makes it clear that it is not an ordinary creature. The massive snake resembles a gigantic cobra, and it appears completely determined to approach Hina. She cannot believe that even after barely surviving the dinosaur, she is being given no opportunity to rest. Hina quickly gets back on her feet, but her body feels completely exhausted. She has almost no stamina left, and the thought of running from another monster feels impossible. She desperately hopes that the comfortable bed skill will actually work as intended. As the cobra approaches, Hina remains near the bed and puts her faith in the ability she has just created. The massive snake suddenly moves toward her as though it is preparing to attack. Hina braces herself for the worst and desperately hopes that the skill will protect her. Instead of attacking, however, the cobra suddenly stops and moves away. Hina remains frozen in place for a moment, completely unable to understand what has just happened. She slowly realizes that the comfortable bed safe effect has actually worked. The snake cannot enter the protected area around the bed, meaning that the skill has effectively created a small zone where she cannot be attacked by outside creatures. Hina is amazed that the strange ability actually functioned exactly as described. The bed is genuinely comfortable, just as its name suggests, and the sense of safety allows her body to finally relax. She begins wondering whether her sudden tiredness is partly because she finally feels safe enough to stop running. After everything she has endured, the moment her body relaxes, the exhaustion she had been suppressing begins overwhelming her. Her eyelids become heavier, and she starts struggling to stay awake. She knows that she should not fall asleep in an unfamiliar dungeon, even if the bed appears to be protecting her. She tries desperately to keep her eyes open, reminding herself that she has no idea what could happen if she loses consciousness. Despite her efforts, however, her exhaustion continues to grow. Just as she is about to fall asleep, she suddenly notices someone standing nearby. A strange man is looking down at her and checking whether she is alive. Hina struggles to focus on the person in front of her, barely understanding how someone else could have appeared so quietly. Before she can properly react, she feels something sharp touch her. The man has poked her with a pointed stick to determine whether she is conscious. The sudden pain jolts Hina awake, causing her to immediately sit up in surprise. The stranger then carefully examines her and confirms that she is awake. He explains that he had initially mistaken her for a humanoid plant-type monster and therefore needed to check whether she was actually human. He remains suspicious as he looks her over, still trying to determine whether she is truly a person or some strange monster disguised as one. Hina stares at the man in complete disbelief. After surviving a dinosaur, being chased through a swamp, nearly becoming food for another monster, discovering a mysterious survival skill, and finally escaping a gigantic cobra, she now finds herself in a situation where she has to prove that she is actually human. Her already exhausting first day as an awakener has somehow become even more absurd. The man continues examining Hina carefully, studying her appearance and behavior until he finally realizes that she is not some strange humanoid plant-type monster hiding inside the dungeon. He had initially mistaken her for a creature because of the unusual way she had been resting among the plants, but after taking a closer look, he confirms that she really is a human being. Hina stares at him in shock for a moment, barely able to process the fact that another human has finally appeared in front of her after everything she has endured. Then, without even thinking about it, she suddenly gets to her feet and rushes toward him, tightly hugging him as an overwhelming sense of relief washes over her. She has finally been found. A hunter has come to save her. After spending what feels like an eternity trapped inside the dungeon, constantly running from monsters and desperately trying to survive despite having almost no combat abilities, Hina finally feels as though she is safe. The hunter is surprised by her sudden reaction and gently tries to calm her down, understanding that she must have been terrified after being trapped inside the dungeon for so long. He can feel how tightly she is holding onto him, and Hina is so relieved that she can barely contain her happiness at finally seeing someone who can take her out of this nightmare. She eventually looks up at him directly, allowing him to properly examine her condition. Her clothes are covered in dirt, her hair is messy and disheveled, and her entire appearance clearly reflects everything she has endured inside the dungeon. The hunter takes one look at her condition and realizes that she must have suffered considerably. Hina immediately becomes embarrassed when she notices how filthy she has become and awkwardly apologizes for her appearance, knowing that she must look terrible after everything that happened. The hunter does not seem particularly bothered by her dirty appearance and instead turns his attention toward the situation inside the dungeon. He asks whether the boss has already been cleared, wanting to know whether the rescue operation is close to completion. Hina is relieved when she learns that the situation is being handled, and the hunter explains that the entire surrounding region has become a complete disaster because it was swept up by the dungeon gate. Despite the enormous destruction caused throughout the area, the actual dungeon itself was only an E-rank dungeon. Hina is completely stunned when she hears this. The revelation that the dungeon was only E-rank immediately makes her rethink everything that happened to her. She remembers being chased by the gigantic dinosaur-like monster, barely escaping through the swamp, nearly being eaten by another creature, and then facing the enormous snake that appeared just when she thought she had finally found somewhere safe. She had spent the entire time believing that she was trapped inside an incredibly dangerous dungeon, and every single encounter had pushed her to the absolute limit. Now she discovers that the dungeon itself was only E rank. Hina begins reflecting on how absurdly close to death she had been despite the dungeon having such a low difficulty rating. She realizes that her D rank skills were probably only effective because the dungeon itself was relatively weak. If she had been thrown into a much higher ranked dungeon with the exact same statistics and abilities, she would probably not have survived for even a few minutes. The thought makes her realize just how incredibly lucky she had been. Her ridiculous luck statistic of 45 may genuinely have played a major role in keeping her alive. The hunter then becomes suspicious of Hina and begins wondering whether she is an awakener. Hina is immediately startled by the question and cannot understand how he could possibly have figured it out. The hunter explains that he noticed she had been hiding her presence. According to him, only awakeners possess the ability to conceal their presence in such a manner. However, because he was still able to detect her relatively quickly, he assumes that her rank must be extremely low. He also points out that there are no awakeners listed among the missing people, making her situation even more unusual. He reminds her that deliberately hiding one's abilities and pretending to be an ordinary unawakened civilian is illegal. Hina quickly explains that she had only awakened immediately before being dragged into the dungeon. She had been working overtime until dawn after several exhausting days at the office, barely able to keep her eyes open when the awakening suddenly occurred. The moment her awakening happened, she was swept directly into a dungeon gate before she had even had time to understand what was happening. Once she arrived inside, she was immediately chased by monsters and had to desperately rely on her newly acquired abilities just to survive. She had only managed to conceal herself by using one of her skills, and the timing of everything had been so incredibly unfortunate that she had never even received a proper opportunity to examine her abilities. The hunter becomes curious about what type of awakener Hina actually is and begins considering the most common possibilities. He wonders whether she might be a warrior, a mage, a summoner, or another familiar combat-related class. He asks her to reveal what kind of class she awakened with, but Hina becomes embarrassed because she does not know how to explain her unusual class without sounding ridiculous. She hesitates and struggles to pronounce the name properly, causing the hunter to become confused about what she is trying to say. Hina eventually manages to explain that she awakened as a housekeeper. The hunter stares at her in disbelief. He has never heard of a class like that before and cannot understand how such a class could possibly exist within the world of awakeners. Hina then explains that the class is exactly what the name suggests. It is focused on housekeeping and household management, including cooking, cleaning, laundry, and various other domestic tasks. The hunter becomes increasingly amused as he tries to comprehend how a class dedicated to managing a household could exist alongside warriors, mages, summoners, and other combat-oriented awakeners. Even Hina herself is unsure why the system gave her such an unusual class, so she can only assume that it refers to the ordinary concept of housekeeping that everyone already knows. The hunter suddenly bursts into loud laughter. Throughout his career, he has encountered countless different types of awakeners and unusual abilities, but he has never heard of anything remotely similar to a housekeeper class. Hina becomes embarrassed and irritated by his reaction, unable to understand why her class is so funny to him. She then reveals the only skills she has been able to use so far. One of them is comfortable bed, while the other is plucking herbs. The hunter finds the combination even more amusing because both abilities perfectly match the idea of a housekeeper. He continues laughing at the absurdity of her class while Hina tries to explain that those very skills are actually the reason she survived inside the dungeon. Without comfortable bed, she would not have been able to create a safe place to rest when she was exhausted, and without plucking herbs, she would not have been able to gather the materials required to create the bed. Her abilities may sound ridiculous compared with the powers of ordinary hunters, but they had genuinely saved her life. The hunter eventually realizes that he has been laughing too much and apologizes, explaining that he simply finds her awakening fascinating because it is something he has never encountered before. He then becomes more serious and wonders what Hina was doing inside the dungeon in the first place. Since the rescue operation is apparently complete, he tells her that she should leave the dungeon and get herself checked by the emergency medical team. Before Hina can respond, another man approaches from behind them. He looks toward Hina and the hunter and immediately becomes shocked by the person standing beside her. He recognizes the hunter at once and realizes that the man is not an ordinary hunter. The person standing beside Hina is Kang Jinhyun, one of the rare S-class hunters in the entire world. His reputation is so extraordinary that there are very few people in Korea who do not know his name. He has earned the nickname Hands of Destruction because whenever he passes through a dungeon, there is often not even a trace of the monsters that were previously there. He is Korea's #1 S-class hunter, Kang Jinhyun, and his fame extends far beyond his combat abilities. His appearance has received enormous attention from the public, with his face constantly appearing in news reports, online articles, and discussions throughout the internet. His popularity has become so extreme that people even joke that anyone living in Korea who does not know who Hunter Kang Jinhyun is must be a spy. Hina had seen him on television and through online media before and had always thought that he was handsome, but seeing him in person is an entirely different experience. She cannot help staring at him with sparkling eyes, amazed by how impressive he looks in real life. The hunter notices her reaction and casually puts an arm around her while explaining that he had simply been talking to the newly awakened little chick for a moment. He then mentions that her class and skills are incredibly unique and interesting, apparently finding the situation amusing enough to bring it up in front of the S-class hunter. Kang Jinhyun, however, immediately makes it clear that he has absolutely no interest in hearing about someone else's awakening information. He calmly refuses to listen, showing no curiosity whatsoever about another person's abilities or personal information. He then turns his attention toward the other hunter and criticizes the way he is behaving towards someone who has only just awakened and does not yet understand how the hunter world works. Kang Jinhyun explains that he does not expect someone with such little experience to possess the mindset of a high-ranking hunter, but basic manners should still be maintained. The other hunter becomes defensive and explains that he did not threaten Hina or force her to reveal anything. He had simply asked her about her class and skills, so he cannot understand why Kang Jinhyun suddenly became so serious about the situation. Kang Jinhyun then gives Hina a warning of his own. He explains that revealing information about an awakening, especially details concerning one's skills and abilities, can be extremely dangerous. Other people could potentially use that information against her, and once someone knows exactly what an awakener can or cannot do, they may be able to exploit their weaknesses. Hina listens to the warning but does not feel particularly concerned because her rank is so low and her abilities are not exactly impressive combat skills. From her perspective, there does not seem to be much value in hiding information about a D-ranked housekeeper whose abilities include comfortable bed and plucking herbs. The other hunter immediately supports Hina's perspective and points out that she probably does not have much to worry about given how harmless and unusual her abilities appear to be. Hina feels relieved that he has taken her side and thanks him for supporting her in front of the intimidating S-class hunter. Kang Jinhyun nevertheless maintains that it would still be safer for her to hide her awakening, regardless of how weak or strange her abilities might seem. Hina accepts the advice and acknowledges that he is probably right. Internally, she finds Kang Jinhyun incredibly young for someone with such an intimidating reputation, yet his personality seems completely opposite to his youthful appearance. He is stubborn, serious, rigid, and almost like an old-fashioned man who has no interest in relaxing. Hina finds him extremely stuffy after listening to his lecture. At the same time, she recognizes that what he said was not completely wrong. The other hunter had indeed asked about her abilities without considering the risks, even if he had not intended any harm. He eventually realizes that he may have gone too far and apologizes to Hina, admitting that he should not have asked such personal questions so casually. Hina immediately reassures him that there is no need for him to apologize. After all, he was the person who saved her life, and she does not consider telling him about her class and skills to be a particularly serious problem. In fact, she feels somewhat relieved after finally being able to tell someone about her strange awakening. Ever since receiving the housekeeper class, she had been worried and embarrassed because it was so different from the classes she had expected. She had been afraid that other people might laugh at her or consider her useless, so being able to explain everything to someone who had already helped her makes her feel considerably less burdened. The hunter then suddenly grabs onto Hina and makes an unexpected confession. He expresses that he likes her because of the way she speaks and the kindness she shows. He explains that he cannot remember the last time someone in his surroundings spoke to him so politely and warmly. He jokingly compares her pleasant manner of speaking to the complete lack of manners he normally encounters from the people and even animals around him. Hina becomes nervous and explains that she is not doing anything particularly special. She is simply speaking in the ordinary polite manner expected from a normal member of society. The hunter finds this even more amusing and tells her that she should contact him whenever she needs help. He offers to treat her to a meal and encourages her to ask him immediately if she ever has questions about her awakening. He then gives her his card and properly introduces himself as Wumina. He tells Hina that they should leave the dungeon now and begin heading toward the exit. Hina thanks Hunter Wumina for sharing her information with her and for helping her throughout the situation. Wumina responds warmly, finding her reaction cute and continuing to joke around with her. Then, after realizing that she never introduced herself properly, Wumina asks for the most important information he had forgotten to ask. Hina introduces herself as Li Hina. Wumina repeats her name to make sure he remembers it and then tells her that they should leave. Hina agrees, and the two of them begin walking toward the dungeon portal. As they approach the exit, the rescue workers and emergency crews are already waiting on the other side. Wumina points out that the emergency crew is nearby and tells Hina that she should get herself checked properly. He also reminds her that she needs a consultation regarding the disaster damage because the dungeon gate has caused widespread destruction throughout the surrounding region. Hina agrees and steps through the portal. The moment she emerges on the other side, she is confronted by the scale of the disaster. Emergency workers are moving everywhere, carrying injured people on stretchers and attempting to organize the chaotic situation. The entire area has been devastated by the dungeon gate, leading buildings, roads, and surrounding areas in complete disorder. Hina looks around and checks her own condition. She feels a little stiff and exhausted, but surprisingly, she does not think there is anything seriously wrong with her. Compared with what she has just experienced inside the dungeon, the emergency area almost feels unreal. She cannot stop thinking about the fact that the dungeon itself was only E rank. She remembers what Wumina told her and finally begins to understand the scale of the disaster outside. She had heard the explanation earlier, but she had never imagined that the damage would be this extensive. The entire region had been swept up by the dungeon gate, and the destruction had affected countless people. Even though the actual dungeon was only E rank, the consequences of its appearance had been enormous. As Hina stands there trying to take everything in, one of the emergency workers notices her condition and approaches her. He asks whether she is all right and wonders if she may have injured her head. He offers to place her on a stretcher so that she can be examined properly. Hina is surprised by the suggestion and immediately reassures him that she is perfectly fine and does not need to be carried anywhere. However, as she looks around and begins examining the destruction more carefully, she suddenly notices something that makes her expression change completely. Her office building is gone. Her home is gone too. The places that had been part of her ordinary life only hours earlier have disappeared in the disaster. She slowly realizes that everything she owned and everything she was familiar with has been swept away. Her workplace, where she had spent countless hours working overtime, is no longer there. Her home, the place she would normally return to after exhausting days at the office, has also disappeared. The reality finally sinks in, and the emotional weight of everything that has happened begins overwhelming her. After surviving the dungeon by the narrowest possible margin, Hina had thought that reaching the outside world would finally mean that everything was over. Instead, she now has to face the terrible truth that the life she knew before entering the dungeon may no longer exist at all. She looks at the destruction around her, unable to hold back her emotions any longer, and tears begin flowing from her eyes. Hina cannot believe what has happened to her. The reality that both her home and her workplace have been completely destroyed finally begins to sink in, and she feels as though everything she had worked so hard for has been taken away from her in an instant. She had deliberately chosen a place to live close to her office because the convenience of being near work was important to her. Since she had been working such long hours and constantly staying late at the company, she had wanted to minimize the time she spent traveling between work and home. She had chosen that house specifically because of its proximity to the office, believing that it would make her exhausting routine just a little easier to handle. Now, however, both places are gone. She cannot help wondering if this is somehow the price she has paid for spending so much of her life working overtime. She remains on the ground in disbelief while people around her begin moving toward her to offer assistance. The destruction surrounding her only makes the situation feel more real. The dungeon gate has not simply interrupted her life. It has completely destroyed the life she had built. Overwhelmed by anger and frustration, Hina looks toward the sky and begins cursing the dungeon and the gate responsible for ruining everything. She cannot understand how something as ridiculous as a dungeon can suddenly appear and destroy people's homes, workplaces, and entire lives without warning. Her outburst causes some of the emergency workers nearby to become concerned. A member of the ambulance team quietly wonders whether Hina might have injured her head inside the dungeon because of the way she is shouting and behaving. Another person notices the state of her surroundings and realizes that her house must have disappeared because of the dungeon disaster. The destruction is so complete that there is barely anything left to identify as a home. One of the workers reflects on how devastating that must be, especially in Korea, where a home represents far more than simply a place to sleep. For many Koreans, a home is deeply connected to their sense of security, stability, and personal life. Hina slowly begins walking through the ruined streets, staring at the destruction around her. Buildings have been damaged, roads are filled with debris, and the familiar surroundings she once knew are almost impossible to recognize. The company that had paid her salary and occupied so much of her time is practically gone, making it no different from a company that has completely gone under. Her workplace, where she had spent countless nights working until dawn, no longer exists. Then she begins thinking about her house and wonders whether there will be any compensation for everything that has been lost. She had come to this area expecting that perhaps she would still find something remaining, but now she sees just how severe the destruction truly is. That house had been especially important to her because it was the first proper long-term rental she had managed to secure after spending so much time moving between short-term rentals. She had finally found a place she could call her own for an extended period, and she had filled it with her belongings, furniture, and the small things that had made it feel like home. Now everything has disappeared. The memories become too overwhelming, and tears begin flowing down her face. She looks toward the sky and cries out in desperation, unable to accept that all of her belongings have been taken from her. She desperately wants her house back. She wants her deposit returned. She wants her furniture back. She wants everything she had worked for to be restored. Just as her emotions reach their peak, the familiar system banner suddenly appears before her eyes. A message announces that she has unlocked the hidden skill Home Sweet Home. Hina is immediately surprised by the announcement. She had already been confused by the strange abilities of her housekeeper class, and now another hidden skill has appeared without warning. She wonders what a hidden skill even is and what Home Sweet Home could possibly mean. The system provides an explanation, stating that a hidden skill is a special ability that manifests when certain conditions are fulfilled. It then explains that Home Sweet Home is an active skill capable of providing a home to the skill user. The condition for unlocking it is particularly unusual. It can only be unlocked when an awakener belonging to the housekeeper class desperately desires a home while being in a homeless state. Hina stares at the explanation in disbelief as she slowly realizes what the skill is offering her. It will give me a home? She thinks, still struggling to believe it. If this is actually true, then this skill may be even more incredible than winning the lottery. She has just lost the house she worked so hard to obtain, and now the system is offering her a new one. Yet despite how useful the ability sounds, something about the conditions makes her feel uneasy. She cannot help thinking that the reason she was able to unlock it is incredibly depressing. The skill only appeared because she had become completely homeless and was desperately wishing for somewhere to live. The thought makes the ability feel less like a reward and more like a consolation prize for everything she has lost. Still, Hina knows that she has nothing to lose by testing it. Before activating the skill, however, she remembers the warning she received from Kang Jinhyun. He had specifically told her that it was too dangerous to disclose information about her awakening or her skills to other people. Hina immediately looks around to make sure nobody is nearby. She checks the surrounding area carefully and confirms that there does not appear to be anyone watching her. Once she is certain that she is alone, she finally decides to activate the new skill. She calls out the name of the ability, and the moment she does, something extraordinary happens. A sudden flash of lightning appears, and an unfamiliar door materializes directly in front of her out of nowhere. Hina stares at it in confusion. There is no building behind it. There is nothing surrounding the door that could explain where it came from. It simply stands there by itself, as though it has been placed in the middle of nowhere. Hina becomes curious and cautiously reaches toward the handle. She grips it and slowly turns it, wondering whether this strange door really leads to the home promised by the skill. She opens it and steps inside. As soon as she enters, she looks around in amazement and wonders if this is actually supposed to be her new house. The system immediately provides another message, welcoming her to Home Sweet Home for the first time. It explains that the state of the house will automatically be adjusted according to the user's statistics. However, the adjustment process will take some time to complete. Hina stares at the loading process and is immediately reminded of the moment she first awakened. Even then, The system had taken what felt like forever to complete its calculation. Now it is doing the same thing again. She becomes increasingly annoyed by how slow the system seems to be. She cannot understand why everything has to take so long when she is already exhausted and desperate for a place to rest. She watches the loading process continue and complains internally about the system being just as slow as her computer at work. While waiting, she suddenly notices how dirty her hands have become. She raises one of them and looks at the dirt covering her fingers. She remembers that she has spent hours inside the dungeon gathering plants, crawling through swamps, running from monsters, and creating her makeshift bed. Her hands are filthy, and suddenly all she wants is to wash them properly. She thinks about how badly she wants to clean herself up, but before she can do anything, another system message finally appears. The adjustment has been completed. Hina immediately becomes excited and wonders what kind of house has been created for her. She waits for the final result, and then the system announces that Home Sweet Home is now open. A sudden burst of light fills the entire room. The flash is so intense that Hina immediately covers her eyes. The brightness is almost painful, and she feels as though her eyes are burning. She struggles to see anything and has to wait for her vision to recover. For a moment, she genuinely fears that she might have gone blind from the ridiculous amount of light produced by the skill. She continues rubbing her eyes while waiting for the afterimage to disappear. Eventually, her vision begins returning to normal, and she cautiously opens her eyes to inspect the house. The system explains that a suitable house will be provided according to the user's Home Sweet Home rank. Since Hina is a D-rank user, she has been provided with a basic level 1 studio. Hina looks around and initially tries to remain positive. Even if the studio is old and worn out, she thinks that she would rather stay somewhere like this than remain completely homeless. At least it is still a home. But the moment she gets a proper look at the interior, her optimism immediately disappears. She notices how dirty the place is, and the condition of the room is far worse than she expected. She is so disgusted by the state of the place that she nearly feels like vomiting. The floors and surfaces are filthy, and the entire studio looks as though it has not been properly cleaned in years. Then she remembers the most important part of any home: the bathroom. She approaches it with growing concern and opens the door. The moment it opens, an unpleasant smell reaches her. The bathroom is filthy, disgusting, and incredibly ominous even at first glance. Hina recoils immediately, overwhelmed by the condition of the room. The sight is so terrible that she nearly collapses from disgust. She quickly closes the bathroom door again and decides that it is better to avoid looking at it for the moment. She briefly wonders whether she would actually be better off staying in the emergency shelter instead of living in this place. For now, she decides to seal the bathroom away and deal with it later. Before she can even begin figuring out how to improve the studio, another system message appears and asks whether she would like to sign a contract for the corresponding studio. Hina immediately refuses. She cannot believe that the system expects her to sign a contract for such a terrible place. She makes it clear that she absolutely does not want this house and demands to see another option. However, the system does not seem interested in negotiating. It repeatedly asks her the same question about signing the contract. Hina becomes increasingly frustrated as she searches for another option but cannot find one. There is no alternative house listed anywhere. There is not even a button that allows her to reject the offer properly. She complains that the system has not even given her another choice and wonders what kind of housing service only provides one terrible property and then expects the customer to sign immediately. At one point, the interface changes, but the only available option is still to accept. Hina becomes even more annoyed because she had expected at least 2 options, just like a normal housing market would provide. She sarcastically thinks that if the system wanted her to choose a house, it should at least have shown her 2 houses to choose from. Instead, she has no choice whatsoever. Eventually, after exhausting every possible option, Hina reluctantly accepts the contract. She feels as though she has been tricked into signing for a terrible property and cannot help thinking that the entire process resembles a scam. The system immediately announces that the contract has been successfully signed and promises to return with an even more satisfying service. Hina stares at the message with disbelief but decides that she should try to think positively. At least she has a home now. Even if the studio is dirty and unpleasant, she can probably clean it herself. She reminds herself that it is still better than having nowhere to live at all. If she cleans the room properly, perhaps she can eventually turn it into something comfortable. Just as she begins accepting the situation, another message appears congratulating her on realizing her dream of buying her own house. Hina is immediately irritated by the wording. She has not bought a house at all. She has simply been forced into signing a contract for a filthy level 1 studio that she did not even want. She wonders if the system is deliberately mocking her. The system then explains that it is the homeowner's responsibility to keep the house warm and pleasant, and that this is the duty of a housekeeper. It further states that homeowners with inadequate statistics require a great deal of training. Hina becomes confused by the phrase inadequate statistics. She cannot understand what the system means by that or why her statistics are suddenly being described as inadequate. She has already been trying to accept everything that has happened to her, even though the situation feels unfair, but this final message pushes her patience to its limit. She becomes furious and demands that the system reveal itself immediately. Instead of responding in the way she expects, the banner informs her that it is not the system. Hina freezes for a moment. She had assumed that the strange banner was simply another part of the system controlling Home Sweet Home, so hearing that it is not the system makes absolutely no sense to her. She becomes frustrated and starts kicking at various things around the room in irritation. Suddenly, another message announces that the active skill Best Extermination has been automatically activated. Hina barely has time to understand what is happening before she hears a strange sound. Something small appears inside the room. It turns out to be a snail. The unexpected appearance leaves Hina completely confused. The snail seems to have appeared out of nowhere, and the system explains that she should wait a little until the snail recovers. Hina looks at the strange creature and begins wondering what is going on. Another message starts examining the homeowner's disposition and personality. The result describes Hina as very hot-tempered and violent. The snail itself looks visibly annoyed by the way she has been behaving. Hina quickly apologizes and explains that she thought the snail was simply some kind of bug that had suddenly jumped toward her, which was why she reacted by kicking around the room. The snail, however, does not seem willing to accept her excuse. It points out that she has a habit of slapping or kicking things whenever she is surprised and concludes that she has a very bad personality. Hina becomes offended by how harshly the snail is judging her and argues that reacting in surprise is something that could happen to anyone. She cannot believe that the snail is being so mean to her after everything she has already suffered. The snail responds by essentially calling her the perpetrator and insists that there is no excuse for her behavior. Hina eventually admits that she was wrong and apologizes again. However, she remembers something else and asks the snail about the earlier message congratulating her on realizing her dream of buying her own house. She begins to realize that there is something strangely cute about the little creature despite its rude attitude. The snail confirms that the congratulatory message came from it. Hina immediately recalls noticing that the system windows had not always looked the same. The earlier system messages had appeared in blue, while the congratulatory messages surrounding Home Sweet Home had appeared in pink. She now understands that there must have been a difference between the actual system interface and the messages being produced by this strange creature. She asks whether the snail is saying that it is not the system, and the snail confirms that it is not. Hina then becomes even more curious and asks what the creature actually is. She cannot believe that it is an ordinary snail. After all, normal snails cannot talk, and this particular snail has a body that sparkles strangely, making it obvious that there is something supernatural about it. The snail proudly confirms that it is very special. It introduces itself as the housing manager of Home Sweet Home, explaining that its role is to manage the house and assist the homeowner. The strange creature then politely asks Hina to look forward to their future cooperation and calls her the homeowner. Hina, still trying to process the bizarre situation, agrees to cooperate with it. The snail then bows toward her, and Hina notices something unusual about its face. She realizes that the snail's eyes are positioned in a way that allows them to extend outward. One of the eyes comes forward and leans toward her, making her wonder whether she can actually shake hands with a snail like this. For the first time since entering the dungeon, Hina finds herself facing a completely different kind of problem. She has survived monsters, nearly died inside a swamp, discovered that she is a D-ranked housekeeper, lost her home and workplace, and somehow obtained a strange new house. Now she has to figure out how to live with a sparkling, talking snail that claims to be the housing manager of her new home. Hina finally finds herself sitting inside a large, steaming hot jacuzzi, allowing the warm water to wash away the dirt and exhaustion that had accumulated on her body after everything she had experienced inside the dungeon. For the first time in what feels like forever, she finally begins to feel a little more human again. The warmth surrounds her tired body, and she cannot help feeling relieved that she has finally managed to properly wash herself. She had wanted to clean herself immediately after returning from the dungeon, but the bathroom in her newly acquired studio was so filthy that she could not even imagine stepping inside it. Compared with that disgusting bathroom, the jacuzzi feels like an absolute luxury. She relaxes in the water and reflects on everything she needs to deal with now that the immediate danger has passed. Thankfully, the credit card she had been carrying in her pocket when the disaster occurred had not fallen out. Somehow, despite everything that happened inside the dungeon and during the destruction of the surrounding area, it had remained safely inside her pocket. That small bit of luck is a huge relief because she still needs money to deal with everything that has happened. Her first priority is to go to the dungeon management office and sort out her identification documents. She also needs to purchase a new phone because her old one has been lost along with everything else, and she has to deal with countless other practical problems that have suddenly appeared in her life. She also remembers that she should contact her office, just in case there is still someone she can reach. When she thinks about the number of things waiting for her, it feels like an entire mountain of work has suddenly been dumped on her shoulders. However, for the moment, she decides not to worry about all of it. She has already been through enough, so she allows herself to remain in the hot water for a little longer before getting up and facing reality again. After dealing with the necessary procedures, Hina eventually receives her replacement identification card from the woman working at the counter. She accepts it gratefully and thanks the employee before putting it away safely. The entire process of dealing with the dungeon damage seems incredibly efficient. The authorities and various organizations have clearly become accustomed to dealing with disasters caused by dungeons and gates, so they are able to process everything at remarkable speed. However, Hina also notices the darker side of this efficiency. While the damage is dealt with at lightning speed, the people affected by the disaster are also being drained financially just as quickly. The costs of replacing identification, phones, belongings, housing, and countless other necessities begin piling up almost immediately. She realizes that this is probably the reality everywhere. Disasters may be dealt with efficiently, but ordinary people still have to pay the price for rebuilding their lives. Hina decides that she needs to buy a new phone as soon as possible. Once she has one, she plans to send a message to Appa. She knows he is going to be shocked when he finds out that her house has completely disappeared. The thought of explaining everything that has happened makes her sigh. At least she has some savings, so she should be able to survive for a while. She had managed to save some money over time, and that money will now be what keeps her afloat until she figures out what to do next. Unfortunately, before she can properly plan her future, she receives even more bad news. Her former boss contacts her and apologizes, explaining that the company has decided to shut down because of the disaster and the difficult economic circumstances. Hina listens quietly as her boss explains that the company can no longer continue operating. The situation is already difficult enough, and finding a new job is apparently becoming increasingly challenging even for people with years of experience. The economic conditions are not good, and companies are struggling to hire new workers. Hina cannot help feeling worried about what this means for her future. She had already lost her home, and now she has lost her job too. The two things that had provided her with stability have disappeared almost simultaneously. She wonders whether she will be able to find another job anytime soon. But instead of allowing herself to become overwhelmed by despair, she quickly changes her mindset. Finding a new job is not simply a possibility anymore. It is a necessity. She needs to survive, so she has no choice but to move forward. Rather than becoming depressed and spending her time mourning everything she has lost, Hina decides to deal with each problem one at a time. She reminds herself that no matter how hopeless the current situation seems, it is still far better than what the world was like 10 years ago when the dungeons first appeared. Humanity has learned how to deal with dungeon disasters, and most importantly, she herself managed to survive because she awakened. Her class may be incredibly strange, and her rank may be embarrassingly low, but it still saved her life. She even received a free house through her hidden skill, Home Sweet Home. It may be a terribly dirty studio that looks like it has been neglected for years, but technically, it is still a house. Hina decides to focus on the positive side of the situation. She eventually reaches a shop and prepares to purchase the things she needs. She takes out her credit card and hands it over to the cashier, asking to pay with it. As she watches the transaction being completed, she reflects on how strange her situation has become. If she looks at everything from a different perspective, she has actually experienced an incredible streak of luck. She survived a dungeon, awakened as a hidden class, discovered several strange skills, unlocked a hidden home, and somehow still has her money and identification. Her situation may be terrible, but she has managed to survive. With her new supplies packed into several heavy bags, Hina finally starts making her way home. She walks along the streets while carrying the shopping bags, but after only a short distance, her arms begin to ache. She cannot believe how heavy everything is and struggles under the weight of everything she has purchased. By the time she reaches the place where her new house is located, she is completely exhausted. She stands in front of the door and tries to open it, only to remember that the door does not simply exist permanently in the physical world. Her home sweet home skill requires her to call it whenever she wants to enter. She immediately activates the skill and calls out for home sweet home. In an instant, the strange door appears before her. Hina stares at it with relief before opening it and entering. She feels as though her arms are about to break after carrying all those heavy bags. The moment she enters, however, the housing manager immediately begins criticizing her. The strange snail points out that the homeowner has weak stamina and complains about her sluggish behavior and her tendency to return home late. It also criticizes her lack of refinement as a housekeeper. Hina cannot help thinking that this snail is incredibly cute for something so annoying. The housing manager is clearly part of the home sweet home skill, and although its appearance is adorable, its constant nagging is beginning to drive her crazy. The snail then points out that she has spent around 200,000 won on groceries and cleaning supplies alone. Hina is left confused because she genuinely needed the things she purchased. The snail, however, focuses on the fact that she bought such a large amount of toilet paper, detergent, bleach, and other cleaning supplies without comparing prices between different supermarkets. It criticizes her for failing to practice proper price comparison and concludes that she lacks frugality. Hina is left speechless. She knows that the snail has a point, but she also feels that the criticism is unfair given the circumstances. She had an enormous number of problems to deal with at the same time, and she could not spend hours comparing the prices of every single item while rushing between different places to replace her identification, purchase a phone, contact her former employer, buy necessities, and deal with her destroyed home. In her mind, purchasing reasonably cheap and good quality products from one supermarket is far more practical when time is limited. Time is valuable too. The housing manager acknowledges that her reasoning is rational and accepts her explanation. It then orders her to begin cleaning immediately. Hina accepts the command and prepares herself for the enormous cleaning task ahead. She puts on gloves and a mask and gets ready to enter the filthy studio. Before beginning, she looks down at her shoes and suddenly realizes that she is about to walk into the house while still wearing the shoes she has been walking around outside in. As a Korean, the thought makes her deeply uncomfortable. She cannot accept the idea of walking around inside the house with outdoor shoes, but the floor is so dirty that she feels she has no other choice. The interior is actually dirtier than the streets outside, so removing her shoes would not solve anything. Just as she prepares to start cleaning, the housing manager suddenly stops her and points out that something is wrong with her outfit. Hina wonders what could possibly be wrong because she is already wearing gloves and a mask and believes that should be enough. The snail explains that she is lacking the basic outfit required of a proper housekeeper. According to the housing manager, a housekeeper's basic outfit consists of a cleaning bandana and an apron. Gloves and masks are optional additions, but the bandana and apron are considered essential. Hina is surprised by how fussy the snail is about her clothing. She reluctantly accepts the explanation and remembers that she happened to purchase an apron earlier that day. She decides that she can at least put that on. As for the bandana, she wonders whether she can simply use a dishcloth as a substitute. Before she can proceed, a blue system banner appears and provides another explanation. Wearing the proper items increases the efficiency of all skills by 50%, and the higher the housekeeper's rank becomes, the greater the advantage provided by proper equipment will become. Hina is immediately excited by this discovery. She had no idea that even her housekeeper outfit could provide a buff. The housing manager warns her that she should not become too surprised yet because there is more to come. Another blue banner appears, announcing that the passive skill Nifty Fingers has been automatically triggered. Because Hina is wearing the appropriate items, the efficiency of Nifty Fingers has increased by 50%. The skill is described as an ability that allows everyone to receive satisfaction through the user's nifty fingers. Hina is amazed that she has received another skill simply by wearing the proper housekeeper equipment. The explanations given by the system sound somewhat exaggerated and strangely worded, but Hina decides that the actual effect is what matters. Regardless of how strange the description is, having another useful skill can only be a good thing. She decides to give it her best effort and prepares herself for the cleaning. She even raises her fist with determination while the housing manager's eye moves toward her in encouragement. The snail encourages her to keep going and do her best. Hina begins cleaning the house with all the energy she can muster. 3 hours pass as she pours her heart and soul into every part of the cleaning process. She scrubs, wipes, organizes, and cleans every surface she can reach. The work is exhausting, but she refuses to give up. Eventually, the system provides an update showing that the mastery of Nifty Fingers is increasing. Her current mastery reaches 12 out of 1,000. Hina looks at the number and starts calculating whether that is actually a good rate of progress. If she has only reached 12 points after 3 hours of cleaning, she wonders whether that means the skill is incredibly difficult to rank up or whether she is simply progressing slowly. She begins doing the calculations herself. According to the ranking system, 600 minutes multiplied by 3 corresponds to the necessary time calculations, and she works through the numbers in an attempt to determine how long it would take to reach the next rank. Based on her calculations, if she gains approximately 1 point every 10 minutes, then reaching 1,000 mastery points would require around 10,000 minutes. That translates into roughly 16 hours of work, and when spread across several days, it would take around a week. If she only cleans for 8 hours per day, she calculates that she could potentially reach the required mastery in about 21 days. She considers that surprisingly good. Ranking up in roughly 3 weeks does not sound too terrible. However, there is one major problem. She is already completely exhausted after only 3 hours of cleaning. Her body is not built for this kind of endurance, especially with such terrible stamina statistics. Before she can rest for long, the housing manager reminds her that her break is over and orders her to return to cleaning immediately. Hina pleads for a little more rest because she is genuinely exhausted. She reminds the snail that she is still a complete beginner and that her overall statistics are under 30. The snail does not seem particularly sympathetic. Instead, it points out the enormous amount of work that still needs to be done throughout the house. Hina finally reaches her limit and admits that she cannot continue because she is starving. She has spent hours cleaning without properly eating, and the combination of physical exhaustion and hunger has completely drained her. Fortunately, food is suddenly ready. Hina sits down and begins eating with genuine happiness. The meal tastes incredible to her, and after everything she has experienced, simply having a warm and satisfying meal feels almost heavenly. The housing manager watches her eat and immediately comments on how good she is at eating. Hina continues eating until she has finished the entire meal. Once she is done, she feels much more satisfied. She realizes that she has actually eaten everything she had purchased for breakfast and lunch for the following day too. Normally, a single bowl of rice or one ordinary meal would have been enough for her, but after everything that has happened, her body must have been far more exhausted than she realized. Just as she finishes eating, the blue banner appears once again. It announces that all of her depleted stamina has been recovered through eating. The skill is called Rice Power. The explanation states that Rice Power allows the user to recover depleted stamina through food containing rice. Hina is stunned to discover that this is another actual skill. She had assumed that the phrase about Koreans being powered by rice was simply a joke, but apparently her housekeeper abilities have somehow turned that concept into a genuine supernatural skill. She cannot believe that even eating rice has become part of her growing collection of strange abilities. Still, the important thing is that her stamina has been restored. Now that she has recharged herself, she decides that it is time to return to cleaning. The housing manager also announces that house management should begin again. Hina immediately gets back to work. She starts wiping the floor, and as her hands move across the dirty surface, something incredible begins happening. The floor starts shining beneath her fingertips. She watches in amazement as the dirt disappears and the surface becomes clean. It looks almost like magic. The feeling of seeing everything become clean gives Hina a sudden burst of energy. She feels rejuvenated and genuinely happy. For the first time, she begins to understand the satisfaction that comes from housekeeping. She realizes that cleaning something filthy and then seeing it become completely clean can actually feel incredibly rewarding. She becomes so absorbed in the process that she continues cleaning enthusiastically, moving from one part of the house to another. Suddenly, the blue banner appears again and announces that she has reached a huge realization. Her mastery has increased by 500 points. Hina stops in shock and looks at the number. Her current mastery is now 512 out of 1,000. She cannot believe that she gained 500 points all at once. Compared with the miserable 12 points she had gained after 3 hours earlier, this increase feels unbelievably generous. She is shocked by the sudden bonus, while the housing manager celebrates it as an incentive for her hard work. Hina begins to realize that the skill may actually be worth investing in. If her mastery can suddenly increase this dramatically when she becomes absorbed in the work, perhaps becoming a skilled housekeeper will not be as difficult as she originally thought. She continues cleaning, wiping, scrubbing, organizing, and even singing while she works. As her skill develops, the effect of nifty fingers becomes stronger and stronger until it reaches its maximum efficiency. Wherever her fingertips reach, the area becomes completely clean. The transformation of the house becomes almost unbelievable. The entire studio begins sparkling and shining as though it has been professionally cleaned. The difference between the state of the house before she started and its condition now is impossible to compare. Hina looks around in amazement at the results of her work. Every surface is clean, organized, and bright. Even the bathroom, which had originally been the most disgusting part of the entire studio, has finally been cleaned. She had initially been so disgusted by it that she thought it would be easier to seal the door permanently, but now even that room has been transformed. Hina cannot believe that she managed to accomplish all of this. Just as she finishes admiring her work, another blue system banner appears. It announces that the basic level 1 studio has become level 2. Hina immediately realizes that her house has leveled up. She is so overwhelmed by the achievement that she almost begins crying. After everything she has lost, seeing her new home improve because of her own effort gives her a sense of accomplishment that she desperately needed. She begins thinking about what it means to improve her skills and increase her housekeeper rank. She wonders whether increasing her rank will make her better at housekeeping in the way that the name of the class suggests. She also begins wondering whether there are other benefits she has not discovered yet. Hunters develop stronger combat abilities when they rank up, so she wonders whether her housekeeper class might eventually provide her with some kind of offensive ability too. She excitedly asks the housing manager about the possibilities, but the snail immediately tells her to calm down. Hina listens as the housing manager explains that ranking up does indeed provide benefits. If her rank increases, she will be able to create a more pleasant space and become a better housekeeper. Hina concludes that she may eventually become some kind of super housekeeper, which makes her laugh at the absurdity of the idea. Still, she admits that having a clean and pleasant house is genuinely important. The housing manager then adds another concept to the explanation. It says that a peaceful home provides peace for both the soul and the body. Hina agrees that this part is certainly true. A clean and comfortable home can make people feel calmer and more relaxed, but when the housing manager begins extending the idea toward achieving world peace, Hina finds the conclusion a little too extreme. She wonders whether the snail is taking the concept far beyond what was originally intended. The housing manager insists that the country and the home must both be at peace, connecting the condition of a household to the broader concept of harmony and stability. Hina is surprised that the strange snail even knows ancient sayings and expressions. After everything that has happened, she is beginning to realize that the housing manager may be much more intelligent and knowledgeable than its tiny appearance suggests. What started as a ridiculous hidden class and a filthy studio has slowly turned into something much stranger. Hina now has a talking snail managing her home, a growing collection of housekeeper skills, a newly upgraded studio, and an entirely new path ahead of her. Although she still has no idea what the future holds, she is beginning to discover that the power of a housekeeper may be far greater than she originally imagined. The blue banner congratulates Hina once again, announcing that her basic level 1 studio has successfully become a level 2 studio, but this time the message contains something she was not expecting. The system explains that a reward will be given for leveling up the house and asks whether she would like to receive it. Hina immediately becomes interested because she had not realized that upgrading her house would come with rewards, so she eagerly accepts without hesitation. The system begins loading and announces that it is drawing the reward through a lottery, leaving Hina confused about why improving her own house has to involve some kind of lottery draw. She had assumed that reaching a new level would automatically grant her a predetermined reward, but apparently even the system wants to leave the outcome to probability. The loading continues for a while before finally completing, and the banner announces that the draw is finished and congratulates Hina on her reward. She excitedly waits to see what she has received, only for her expression to collapse almost immediately when she discovers that the reward is a worn-out frameless mattress bed simply placed on the floor. Both Hina and the housing manager stare at the pathetic-looking mattress in complete silence, neither of them seeming capable of understanding why this is supposed to be a reward. Hina looks at it with disbelief, wondering what in the world she is supposed to do with something that looks as though it has already survived several generations. The blue banner provides an explanation of the item, describing it as a worn-out frameless mattress bed that supposedly allows the user to experience the effect of a good night's rest. After sleeping on it, the user will apparently feel refreshed one way or another. Hina is not impressed by the description and finds the wording incredibly half-hearted and poorly put together, especially the part about feeling refreshed one way or another. She wonders why the system cannot simply state clearly what the actual effect is, because it sounds less like an official item description and more like a game trying to hide its terrible probability system behind vague wording. Despite her disappointment, Hina eventually decides that the mattress is not completely useless. At the very least, it is better than sleeping directly on the hardwood floor. The mattress is old, but it appears to be reasonably clean, so she decides that she can live with it. Before she can settle down, however, her stomach suddenly growls loudly, reminding her that she has not eaten properly in quite some time. Her hunger returns with full force, and she begins wondering what time it is. When she checks, she is shocked to realize that it is already 8 o'clock. She immediately understands why she is so hungry, since she has been working and cleaning for hours and her body is now demanding food. She remembers buying some snacks earlier and begins searching through the bags she brought home. After rummaging through them for a while, she finally finds what she is looking for and happily pulls out a bag of chips. She starts eating, but the housing manager immediately notices that crumbs are falling onto the floor. Hina acknowledges the problem and assures the snail that she will clean everything after finishing her food. While eating, however, she suddenly notices something strange about the housing manager itself. Its body appears to be shining, and the snail explains that this is one of the effects of leveling up, making it more resplendent as the house has grown. Hina is astonished by the transformation as the little snail sparkles beautifully, the light reflecting from its body making it look surprisingly elegant. She finds the sight incredibly pretty and brilliant, and the snail accepts her compliment with satisfaction. After watching it shine for a moment, Hina realizes that she has been calling it simply Snail ever since they met, but if they are going to live together from now on, she cannot keep referring to it by such a generic name. She therefore asks what its name is, only to receive an answer that essentially amounts to having no name, leaving her dissatisfied. She refuses to continue calling it Snail forever and begins trying to come up with a proper name. Since the creature is a snail, she considers simply giving it a name derived from that fact, but the housing manager immediately criticizes her for having such a careless approach to naming things. Hina then considers calling it House Manager, but she feels that the name has no soul and does not properly represent the strange creature's personality. Suddenly, she gets another idea when she notices the way the snail's shell shines with 5 different colors and remembers the concept of the 5 cardinal colors. She decides to name the snail FCC, using the abbreviation for the 5 cardinal colors. The snail immediately reacts in a way that makes it obvious that it actually likes the name despite its earlier complaints about Hina's naming ability. Hina notices that its mouth is even twitching slightly, almost as though it is trying to hide how pleased it is, and teasingly points out that the snail clearly likes the name. The snail finally accepts it, and from that moment onward, the housing manager receives the name FCC. Hina asks FCC to take good care of her now that they are going to be living together. After everything she has experienced, Hina finally looks around the studio and realizes just how much work she has accomplished. She cannot believe that she managed to transform the place at all. When she first entered, the studio had seemed completely hopeless, filthy, unpleasant, and barely suitable for living, but now the entire house has been cleaned and polished until it practically sparkles. Hina looks around at the result with a sense of achievement and thinks that the transformation is almost a victory for humanity itself, while FCC agrees with her assessment and acknowledges that the homeowner has done an amazing job. Hina reflects on everything she had to endure during the cleaning process. She spent hours sweeping, wiping, scrubbing, and polishing every surface, while also having to move all kinds of furniture around, which was especially difficult because of her weak physical statistics. The task had been much more exhausting than she expected. Her problems did not stop there, because she also had to repeatedly call home sweet home whenever she needed to access the house, since the door did not remain permanently available in the ordinary world. That created another problem whenever she needed to transport her belongings. One of her first ordeals came from the fact that deliveries could not be made directly to the house because it did not have a normal address. Since delivery workers had no way of accessing home sweet home directly, Hina had to drag the purchased items herself to a nearby alley before bringing them inside. The second ordeal was the terrible muscle pain that followed, as her body had already been pushed to its limits and moving heavy items around only made the pain worse. She immediately realizes that having some pain relief patches would have been incredibly useful and makes a mental note to buy emergency medicine and pain relief patches as soon as possible the following day. The more she thinks about everything she has had to deal with, the more she realizes that there were far more necessities than she originally expected. However, all of that effort has not been completely wasted. As she continues working on her home, she begins receiving rewards for reaching higher levels. The level 3 reward turns out to be an all-rounder bidet, which apparently provides relief from constipation when the user sits on it. Hina is surprised by the oddly specific reward but decides that it is still useful. The level 4 reward is a decent refrigerator. It cannot make ice, which disappoints her slightly, but she still admits that it is a perfectly respectable reward. For the first time, she begins thinking that the system may not be completely hopeless after all. The level 5 reward turns out to be a mold extermination solution, which is especially useful considering how filthy the house had been when she first entered it. FCC watches her work and reminds her of an old saying about how effort does not betray the person who puts it in. Hina continues cleaning until the house is finally in good enough condition that there is little left to do. Once the studio is properly cleaned and organized, she realizes that her next major problem is finding a job. She takes out her new phone and begins searching through job listings, checking the companies she has applied to and also thinking about contacting Appa, but neither he nor the companies she contacted have responded yet. She tries to remain patient and tells herself that perhaps she simply needs to wait a little longer. If she keeps submitting applications, maybe eventually someone will contact her, and she refuses to give up after only a few attempts. Then she suddenly remembers something else that she has been putting off. She needs to express her gratitude to the person who saved her. She reaches for the card Hunter Wumina gave her and stares at it for a moment, wondering whether it is really appropriate for her to contact someone from the Blue Dragon Guild. She knows that Blue Dragon is not an ordinary guild. There are several major Awakener guilds in Korea, each specializing in different fields. One guild is known for specializing in magic and dungeon research, while another is composed of only the strongest hunters. There are guilds focused mainly on physical-type awakeners, large compound guilds operating primarily in the south, and other powerful organizations with their own specialties. Alongside these major guilds is Blue Dragon. These 5 organizations are collectively known as the 5 Guilds, and they represent some of the most influential guilds in the country. However, Blue Dragon stands apart from the others because it is the only guild with an S-class hunter. In practical terms, this has made Blue Dragon widely regarded as the best guild in all of Korea. The guild is known for being extremely capable and ambitious, and its reputation became even greater after it managed to attract Kang Jinhyun, Korea's #1 S-class hunter, into its ranks. Blue Dragon also possesses an S-class appraiser, a position that is considered even more valuable in certain respects than having an S-class hunter. Because of this combination of extraordinary talent, Blue Dragon has established itself as one of the leading guilds in the entire world. Hina looks at the card again and decides that she should at least search for information about Wumina before contacting her. She looks her up and is immediately impressed by what she finds. The more she learns about her, the more extraordinary she seems, and Hina begins wondering whether someone like her must have an enormous amount of money. She remembers that she had promised to treat her to a meal as a way of thanking her for saving her life. She is not sure whether a simple meal will be enough to properly express her gratitude to someone from such a powerful guild, but she decides that she should at least try. She takes a breath and finally calls the number on the card. The call is answered surprisingly quickly, and Wumina immediately recognizes her and tells her that she has been waiting to hear from her. She asks how Hina has been doing since the disaster, and Hina explains that she was unable to contact her immediately because of everything that happened after the dungeon. The housing manager watches her from nearby, confused about who she is talking to and why she is suddenly speaking so politely. Wumina laughs and comments on how Hina still speaks in such a polite and pleasant manner. Hina explains that she simply wants to thank her for saving her, but Wumina seems more interested in arranging a meeting. As luck would have it, she happens to be free that day and suggests that they meet and get some food together. Hina agrees, and the two arrange a place to meet. Not long afterward, Hina arrives at the restaurant and looks around, wondering whether this is really the correct place. She cannot believe they managed to arrange a meeting so quickly. Everything has been happening so rapidly that she feels as though she is still being swept along by the aftermath of the dungeon disaster. She enters the restaurant and notices that there are not many customers inside. She understands why when she checks the time and realizes that it is 4 in the afternoon, an unusual time for most people to go out for a proper meal. As she looks around, she notices a profile that seems strangely familiar, and then recognition suddenly hits her. She realizes that the person sitting nearby is none other than Hunter Wumina. She is surprised to have found her so quickly, but Wumina notices her and warmly invites her over. She explains that Hina has arrived earlier than expected and that she had started eating something to fill herself up a little beforehand. Hina apologizes and explains that she tends to eat quite a lot, so she did not want to arrive completely starving. Wumina looks at her carefully and notices that she seems thinner and more exhausted than when they first met. She comments that Hina looks as though she has become noticeably more sunken in just a few days and assumes that she must have suffered a great deal mentally after everything that happened. Hina corrects her, explaining that her suffering was actually more physical than mental. Wumina does not push the subject and instead suggests that they eat first before talking. Hina agrees and offers to grill the meat herself because she is confident in her ability to cook and handle food. Wumina is surprised by the confidence and becomes interested in seeing what she can do. She gives Hina permission to start grilling, and Hina takes control of the meat. As the meat begins sizzling on the grill, the sound immediately makes her hungry. She watches the juices bubble and the surface slowly become crisp, and she realizes just how long it has been since she has properly enjoyed grilled meat. The smell fills the air, making the meal seem even more delicious. Hina becomes determined to grill it perfectly so that it tastes as amazing as possible. At that exact moment, the familiar blue banner suddenly appears before her, announcing that her active skill, "This is the taste of my magic touch," has been activated. Hina is stunned by the sudden appearance of yet another skill and cannot believe that another ability has activated simply because she is preparing food. However, she quickly decides that now is not the time to get distracted. She reminds herself that it would be impolite to let her thoughts wander while someone is waiting for the food she is preparing. She focuses entirely on grilling the meat and carefully watches every piece. Eventually, she decides that it is ready and lets Wumina know that she can begin eating. The finished meat looks completely different from ordinary grilled meat. Even the color appears more vibrant and appealing, and Wumina immediately notices the difference. Hina had claimed that she was good at grilling, and now the appearance of the food seems to prove that she was not exaggerating. Wumina becomes excited to taste it and prepares to take the first bite, while Hina encourages her to enjoy the meal and also takes a piece for herself. The moment their teeth sink into the crispy outer layer, the experience becomes completely extraordinary. The juices that had been hidden inside the meat suddenly burst out with every bite, spreading an incredible flavor throughout their mouths. The texture is perfectly balanced, with a crispy surface surrounding tender meat filled with rich juices. The taste is so overwhelming that it feels almost supernatural. It is as though a tiny meat fairy is performing an elaborate and dynamic ballet inside their mouths, creating a flavor so incredible that neither of them can properly describe it. Both Hina and Wumina are completely overwhelmed by how delicious the food is. Their expressions immediately change, and their attention becomes focused entirely on the meat. The meal is so good that they quickly decide they need much more. They call for additional servings, initially asking for 2 more, but their enthusiasm immediately grows and they increase the order to 4 more servings. Both of them are now completely absorbed in the food, forgetting about everything else for the moment. The blue banner appears once again, confirming the effect of Hina's newly activated skill, "This is the taste of my magic touch." The skill allows the user to create the best possible flavor, and its effect is clearly visible in the reaction of everyone eating the food. Hina stares at the banner in disbelief, slowly realizing that her housekeeper class may contain far more useful and unusual abilities than she ever imagined. What began as a ridiculous D-rank class that seemed completely useless in combat is now allowing her to create an extraordinary home, clean an entire studio with incredible efficiency, recover her stamina through rice, and even make grilled meat taste unbelievably delicious. For the first time, Hina begins to wonder whether becoming a housekeeper might not be such a terrible fate after all. After finishing the incredible meal, both Hina and Wumina eventually put their chopsticks down at almost the same time, sitting back in their seats completely satisfied after devouring the grilled meat. Neither of them can hide how impressed they are by the food, and the meal had been so delicious that they had barely spoken while eating, with both of them becoming completely absorbed in the taste and simply continuing until there was almost nothing left on the table. Wu Mina is especially overwhelmed by the experience and cannot stop thinking about how incredible the meat tasted, expressing her satisfaction at the highest level and agreeing with Hina that they had not even managed to have a proper conversation because they had been too busy eating. The food had been so good that talking had become almost impossible. Wu Mina then suddenly becomes extremely emotional about Hina's cooking, grabs her hand with surprising enthusiasm, looks directly into her eyes, and asks her to become her actual younger sister. Hina is completely caught off guard by the sudden request and cannot understand why Wu Mina has suddenly decided to take their relationship to such a level. Only moments ago, they had been strangers who happened to meet because Hina wanted to thank her for saving her inside the dungeon, and now Wu Mina is trying to establish a genuine sisterly relationship with her. Wu Mina explains that she cannot believe Hina managed to grill the meat so perfectly, claiming that it was the best meat she has ever eaten in her entire life, and her excitement is so overwhelming that she is practically drooling while remembering the taste. She becomes determined to have Hina call her Uni from that moment onward, treating the incredible meal as the foundation of a new sisterhood. Hina is still confused by how quickly everything has developed, but she accepts the relationship and begins referring to Wu Mina as Uni, their sisterhood effectively being created through grilled meat. After sitting and eating nothing but meat for so long, Hina begins feeling a little oily and heavy, so she suggests that they should have something to drink to balance things out, and Wu Mina immediately agrees. They decide to order pork skins as a pairing for the drinks, and Wu Mina places another order with the restaurant, requesting 2 servings of pork skins and 2 bottles of soju. The additional order is added to their already substantial meal. Hina then looks at the bill and asks how much everything has cost, but the moment she sees the total, her eyes widen in shock and her expression almost drains of color as she stares at the amount. She begins wondering whether she can somehow pay the bill in installments because the total is far more expensive than she expected. Wu Mina notices Hina's strange reaction and asks what is wrong, immediately realizing that Hina may be thinking about paying the bill herself and questioning whether she is actually considering doing that. Hina confirms that she is because Wu Mina saved her inside the dungeon, and she had promised herself that she would treat her to a meal as a way of showing her gratitude. Before Hina can do anything, however, Wu Mina quickly takes the bill away from her, reminding Hina that she was the one who invited her out in the first place and that the entire purpose of the meeting was for her to treat Hina. She also jokes that considering how incredible the meat was, she should actually be the one paying Hina for her grilling services. Wu Mina laughs and makes it clear that Hina has already done more than enough simply by giving her such an incredible meal. Hina cannot help thinking that the experience was so extraordinary that she had almost expected Wu Mina to cast some kind of magic spell on the meat. Before they can continue their conversation, the waiter arrives and brings their soju and pork skins. Hina then explains that the incredible flavor of the meat was not simply the result of ordinary cooking and reveals that it was another one of her skills. This is the taste of my magic touch. Wu Mina becomes even more curious about Hina's abilities, remembering that Hina had previously mentioned plucking herbs and comfortable bed and now discovering that she also possesses a skill related to grilling meat. This makes Wu Mina wonder whether being a housekeeper means that Hina receives skills related to every aspect of housekeeping. The two women begin wondering about the true limits of Hina's unusual class, and Hina admits that there is still a great deal she does not understand about her awakening, but based on everything she has experienced so far, she believes that the housekeeper class really does seem to provide skills connected to household activities. Wu Mina becomes fascinated by the concept and immediately admits that she wants Hina's grilling skill, explaining that this is the first time she has ever felt genuinely envious of another person's ability. She asks whether Hina can somehow give the skill to her, but Hina instead decides to focus on grilling the pork skins first and begins preparing the food while Wu Mina watches her with curiosity. As they continue eating and drinking, Wu Mina asks Hina what she actually intends to do with her awakened abilities. Hina takes a moment to think about her future and explains that she needs to get a job because the company she used to work for has gone under. Wu Mina is surprised that Hina is thinking about getting an ordinary job instead of becoming a hunter. She points out that in a world where machines, advanced technology, and even hagwons that train ordinary civilians to become awakeners have become popular, it seems strange for someone with such a special class to simply look for a normal job. Hina acknowledges that she did awaken, but she makes it clear that she does not want to become an active hunter. Her decision is connected to her family and everything she experienced growing up. 10 years ago, when the monsters first appeared, her parents were also killed during a monster raid. After losing their parents, Hina and her older brother had no one else to rely on, so the two of them survived by depending entirely on each other. Her Appa eventually awakened as a D-class hunter. Despite his relatively low rank, he decided to enter dungeons because he wanted to earn enough money to support Hina and keep her alive. He would sometimes disappear into dungeons for weeks and occasionally even months at a time. During those periods, Hina had no way of contacting him and could only sit at home worrying desperately about whether he was still alive. Every time he eventually returned, he was injured in some way. Seeing her brother repeatedly risk his life had left a deep impression on Hina, and she does not want to continue watching him put himself in danger. Now that she has awakened herself, she wants to find a stable job and become financially independent so that she can support him instead. Her goal is to become strong enough financially that her Appa will no longer have to take dangerous dungeon jobs simply to provide for both of them. Wu Mina finds her reasoning understandable but still believes that Hina is wasting the potential of her abilities. She cannot understand how someone with a skill capable of making meat taste that incredible could possibly settle for a normal job. Hina considers the possibility of working at a barbecue restaurant instead, reasoning that if she has such an excellent grilling ability, that would at least be a respectable use of her skill. Wu Mina, however, believes Hina's understanding of the possibilities available to awakeners is far too narrow. She explains that becoming a hunter is only one of many possible professions for an awakener. It is true that a large percentage of awakeners become offensive types, with roughly 80% awakening into combat-oriented abilities, but that does not mean every awakener needs to become a hunter. There are countless different occupations available to people with awakened abilities, including support roles, research positions, technical jobs, facility management, and many other specialized professions. Wu Mina encourages Hina to broaden her understanding of what an awakener can become instead of assuming that hunter is the only meaningful career path. She then suggests that they have another drink while continuing their conversation, reminding Hina to keep an eye on the pork skins because they are starting to burn. Hina immediately turns her attention back toward the grill and continues cooking. During the meal, Hina also ends up explaining more about her home sweet home ability. Wu Mina is fascinated by the skill because she cannot believe that Hina possesses a space that can only be summoned by her. The idea of being able to call forth an entire private space makes the ability sound incredibly grand to someone who does not know what the inside actually looks like. Hina explains that it is technically only a small studio and offers to show her some pictures. She takes out her phone and shows Wu Mina photographs of the place. The moment Wu Mina sees the pictures, her expression changes completely. She cannot believe that this is the house Hina has been talking about. From the pictures, the studio looks so terrible that Wu Mina cannot imagine choosing to live there, even if someone offered the property to her for free. Hina reminds her that she had just called the home sweet home ability amazing, but Wu Mina explains that the ability itself is impressive while the actual house is another matter entirely. Even if the place was merely dirty, it would still be understandable, but the condition of this particular studio is far beyond ordinary dirt. It is practically horrifying. Wu Mina jokes that even orcs would probably refuse to use the bathroom in such a place. Hina shows her the photographs of the bathroom from before she cleaned it, and Wu Mina has to admit that the description was not exaggerated. The bathroom really was that terrible. Hina explains that this is exactly why she spent 3 days and 4 nights cleaning the house. Wu Mina cannot believe that a place in such a condition could possibly be cleaned manually. Hina then shows her the photographs taken after she finished cleaning, and Wu Mina is completely stunned. She practically freezes while staring at the transformation, unable to believe that the clean and beautiful studio in the new pictures is actually the same house she had just seen in the earlier photographs. She asks Hina to be honest and wonders whether she has somehow shown her pictures of a completely different house. Hina confirms that it really is the same place and explains that she cleaned it herself, working until she had practically exhausted every last bit of energy in her body. She admits that she received some assistance from her nifty fingers skill, but she still considers the transformation a miracle. Wu Mina looks at the before and after pictures again and again, unable to find a single part of the transformation that is not impressive, and concludes that Hina's abilities genuinely seem capable of making miracles happen. This leads her to another idea. Instead of looking for an ordinary job, perhaps Hina could work as a professional housekeeper. Wu Mina explains that she is almost certain Hina would receive a huge number of requests if she simply posted photographs of her cleaning abilities. With skills this powerful, Hina might even earn more money than some hunters. Hina considers the idea but points out that her current stamina probably cannot support working as a professional housekeeper at such a demanding level. More importantly, she wants a stable full-time job that comes with all 4 social insurances. Wu Mina is amused by how strongly Hina prioritizes stability. Hina explains that she values security above almost everything else. Her approach to life is extremely cautious. She even describes herself as someone who would knock on stones before crossing them and would rather cross only after seeing someone else safely make it across first. That is essentially her motto. Wu Mina listens to her reasoning and realizes that someone with such a cautious temperament may genuinely be better suited to living as an ordinary civilian rather than constantly risking her life as a hunter. Hina explains that she is already working hard to submit resumes and search for employment. Wu Mina asks whether anyone has contacted her yet. Hina admits that she has not received any offers so far. She has heard that the job market is particularly difficult these days, but she still has some room to wait because she has 5 years of work experience. Compared with completely inexperienced new hires, she believes that her experience should give her at least some advantage. Wu Mina listens to her explanation and then calmly summarizes the situation by pointing out that Hina currently does not have a workplace. Hina is stunned by how directly the high ranker has stated the obvious truth. She internally thinks that this must be what people mean when they talk about truth bombs from high rankers because the words heard despite being completely accurate. Wu Mina then turns the conversation toward Hina's future and asks what she plans to do next. She suddenly offers Hina another possibility. Instead of searching for an ordinary company, Hina could work for the Blue Dragon Guild. Hina is immediately shocked by the suggestion and almost jumps out of her seat. She cannot believe that Wu Mina is seriously suggesting that someone like her should work for Blue Dragon. Hina immediately points out all the reasons why the idea seems impossible. She is only D rank, barely survived the E rank dungeon she was trapped in before, has combined stats of less than 30, and does not possess a single offensive skill. From her perspective, someone like her has absolutely no place in one of the most powerful guilds in Korea. Wu Mina tells her to calm down and explains that Hina is misunderstanding what the Blue Dragon Guild actually is. The guild may have an impressive name and contain some of the strongest hunters in the country, but fundamentally, a guild is still an organization that needs employees in many different fields. It cannot function if it only consists of hunters. Wu Mina explains that Blue Dragon has an entire organizational structure filled with support departments and ordinary workers who are responsible for keeping the guild running. There are administrative teams, facilities management, research staff, security personnel, logistics workers, and countless other departments that have nothing to do with fighting monsters directly. She then tells Hina that there has recently been an opening in the environmental cleaning team, which belongs to the facilities management department. The exact responsibilities are somewhat complicated to explain, but Hina can think of it as a specialized cleaning position. However, Wu Mina makes it clear that this is not an ordinary cleaning job. Most large companies usually outsource cleaning work to third-party cleaning companies, but guilds have additional security concerns because of their access to dungeon-related information, valuable equipment, and restricted areas. There are also certain locations within guild facilities that require specialized knowledge and abilities, meaning that ordinary cleaning companies cannot necessarily handle them. Hina begins to understand why an awakened housekeeper might actually be useful in such an environment. The job may be physically demanding, but Wu Mina assures her that the salary is decent. More importantly, it is a full-time position, which immediately catches Hina's attention. She becomes even more interested when she hears that the position comes with the stability she has been searching for. Wu Mina asks whether Hina is interested in the opportunity, and Hina's eyes begin sparkling with excitement as she realizes that this could solve several of her problems at once. She would have a stable full-time job, a reliable salary, and a position that could actually make use of her strange housekeeper abilities without requiring her to risk her life inside dungeons. The possibility feels almost too good to be true. The two women then shake hands enthusiastically, with Hina finally feeling that her future may have taken a completely unexpected but promising turn. In that moment, she happily places her future in Wu Mina's hands, accepting her new uni as the person who may have just opened the door to her first real opportunity since the disaster. After speaking with the HR chief, Wu Mina immediately arranged an interview appointment for Hina for the very next day, clearly believing in taking advantage of an opportunity while it was still fresh and having no intention of allowing Hina's chance to join the Blue Dragon Guild to disappear because of unnecessary delays. Hina was amazed by how quickly everything had progressed and could not help being impressed by Mina Yuni's incredible drive and decisiveness. Only recently, she had been desperately searching through job listings without receiving a single response, and now she was preparing to interview at one of the most prestigious guilds in Korea. For the interview, Hina borrowed a business professional outfit because she wanted to make the best possible impression, carefully checking her appearance before leaving and wondering whether the borrowed clothes would be formal enough for such an important occasion. She knew that this was not an ordinary company interview. Blue Dragon was one of the most powerful guilds in the country, and she did not want to embarrass the person who had recommended her. When Hina arrived at the guild building, she discovered that she had come earlier than expected. Wu Mina was already there and immediately noticed her arrival, excitedly greeting Hina and once again calling her the god of grilling meat because of the incredible meal they had shared. Hina became embarrassed by the nickname and asked her not to call her that because it made her feel awkward, but Mina explained that she used the nickname out of genuine respect because Hina's grilling ability had left such a strong impression on her. She then looked closely at Hina and noticed that she did not appear to have any signs of a hangover. Hina explained that she did not actually have a hangover, but the entire situation still felt unreal to her. The fact that she was about to interview at the Blue Dragon Guild made her feel as though she had not completely sobered up from the shock of everything that had happened. Mina reassured her that she should not worry because her skills would speak for themselves and encouraged Hina to trust her own abilities. Hina sincerely thanked Mina for looking at her so kindly and for giving her such an incredible opportunity. Mina then prepared to escort her to the location of the interview, but Hina initially refused because she knew Mina must be busy and did not want to take up more of her time. She pointed out that this was not her first interview and that she should be capable of finding the interview room on her own. Mina refused to let her go alone, explaining that since she was the person who had introduced Hina to the guild, she considered it the least she could do to personally take her there. She added that she had actually planned to arrive early and wait for Hina, but Hina had arrived even earlier than expected. Hina felt encouraged by her support and told herself that she now had even more energy because of Mina's encouragement. She became determined to perform well during the interview and promised herself that she would not disappoint her Uni. Mina found Hina's determination adorable and affectionately squeezed her cheeks, teasing her about how cute she looked when nervous. She even joked that Hina could probably receive a free pass into the guild simply by greeting people with that innocent expression. Hina protested because the cheek squeezing actually hurt, but Mina continued treating her affectionately as they made their way through the building. Once they entered the guild, Hina immediately noticed how differently people reacted to Mina. Employees greeted her respectfully as she passed, acknowledging her with formal greetings and obvious familiarity. The same thing happened inside the elevator, where employees who entered the lift recognized Mina and greeted her respectfully, making it clear that she held a significant position within the guild. Hina watched everything carefully and finally realized that Mina must be an extremely high-ranking person within Blue Dragon, not simply a strong hunter. The respect shown toward her was different from the attention given to someone who was merely powerful in combat. When they finally reached the appropriate floor, Mina pointed Hina toward the doors where the interview would take place, reassured her one last time, encouraged her to do her best, and told her to contact her once the interview was finished. Hina thanked her sincerely for bringing her there and watched as Mina left. As the elevator doors closed, Hina became determined not to disappoint the person who had gone out of her way to help her. She told herself that she had to perform well because she did not want to bring shame to Mina after receiving such a generous recommendation. With that motivation in mind, she turned toward the interview area and began walking down the corridor. Her shoes made quiet clicking sounds against the floor as she walked, and she tried to calm herself by reminding herself to relax and behave exactly as she normally would. However, before she could even reach the interview room, something went terribly wrong. One of her shoes suddenly stuck to the floor, causing her to lose her balance and fall forward with a loud bang. Hina was shocked by the sudden accident and looked behind her to figure out what had happened. Her shoe remained firmly attached to the floor, and she quickly realized that some kind of sticky substance had trapped it. She wondered who could possibly have left something like this in the middle of a corridor. At least nobody else seemed to be around, so she was relieved that no one had witnessed her embarrassing fall. She tried repeatedly to pull her shoe free, but it refused to move. The more she struggled, the more firmly it seemed to be attached. She became increasingly frustrated because her interview was about to begin, and she could not exactly walk into the room with one shoe stuck to the floor. Just as she was struggling with the problem, someone approached from behind and noticed her situation. It turned out to be Hunter Kong Jinhyun. He calmly identified the substance as slime extract and explained that it had extremely strong adhesive properties, meaning it would not come off easily. Hina was surprised to see him again and could not help noticing how handsome he looked even in person. For a brief moment, she became distracted by his appearance, but she immediately mentally scolded herself and reminded herself that this was absolutely not the time to be admiring his face. She had an interview in just a few minutes and needed to deal with the problem first. She asked what she should do, explaining that she had an important interview shortly. Jinhyun calmly told her to wait for a moment. Instead of attempting to clean the slime extract, he simply used his incredible physical strength to remove the entire section of concrete floor to which her shoe was attached. He lifted the concrete tile with her shoe still stuck to it and handed the entire thing over to her as though removing a chunk of flooring were the most normal solution imaginable. Hina was left completely speechless. She could not believe that he had actually removed the floor instead of simply finding a way to clean the adhesive. Jinhyun casually remarked that slime extract certainly had impressive adhesion and even offered to carry the concrete for her if it was too heavy. Before Hina could properly respond, another person suddenly appeared from the direction of the interview room after hearing the noise. The newcomer asked what was going on and mentioned that it sounded as though something had broken. The moment he saw the scene in front of him, both he and Hina became completely speechless. He recognized Kang Jinhyun immediately and appeared far from pleased to see him standing there with a chunk of the guild's floor in his hands. He calmly identified himself as the HR chief and pointed out that the repair costs would be deducted from Jinhyun's personal expenses. Hina immediately realized that this must be the same HR chief who was supposed to interview her. She became nervous because he looked genuinely irritated by the damage. However, she knew that Jinhyun had only been trying to help her, so she began explaining that he had been assisting her after her shoe became stuck. The HR chief noticed the slime extract and immediately understood what had happened. He pointed out that Jinhyun was the person who had spilled the substance in the first place and suggested that this was probably why he had been so quick to help Hina. He looked toward Jinhyun as though expecting an explanation, but when Hina turned to look beside her, she realized that he had already disappeared. Kang Jinhyun had quietly left the scene, leaving Hina alone with the HR chief and the consequences of the broken floor. The HR chief turned his attention toward her and confirmed that she was Lee Hina. He then invited her inside so they could begin the interview. Hina followed him into the office, but she was forced to walk with only one shoe because the other was still attached to the piece of concrete. The HR chief noticed the problem and told her that he would bring her a pair of slippers so she could wait comfortably. He left the room for a moment, allowing Hina to sit and collect herself. She looked around the office nervously and started thinking about the fact that she had borrowed the shoes she was wearing. If the shoe had been damaged because of the accident, she would probably have to pay for it too. Her financial problems seemed to be multiplying by the minute. While waiting, she noticed a stack of tissues near the water dispenser. She looked at the slime-covered shoe and wondered whether she could at least try to remove some of the substance herself. It might not work, but there was no harm in trying. She reached for the tissues and began carefully wiping the adhesive from underneath the shoe. At that exact moment, the familiar blue banner appeared. Her passive skill Nifty Fingers had automatically activated. The system recognized that she was using her meticulous skills to remove a foreign substance and provided an explanation for how to deal with a shoe stuck to the floor. According to the system, one simple solution was to remove the section of floor to which the shoe was attached. Hina immediately remembered what Jinhyun had done and realized that his method was technically correct according to the system. However, she still could not believe that an S-class hunter had used his enormous physical strength to remove an entire piece of concrete when the problem could apparently be solved with something as simple as wet wipes and careful cleaning. She began to understand that this might be one of the differences between an S-class hunter and an ordinary housekeeper. Jinhyun saw a problem and solved it with overwhelming strength, while Hina saw the same problem and instinctively thought about how to clean it. As she continued wiping, the slime extract gradually came off the shoe. Hina was surprised by how effective her Nifty Fingers skill was and could not help appreciating the usefulness of her strange housekeeper abilities. Soon afterward, the HR chief returned to the room carrying slippers and apologized for taking a little longer than expected. He explained that he had been searching for a specific slime extract remover because he assumed Hina would not be able to walk comfortably without slippers. He then noticed that the slime extract seemed to have disappeared from her shoe and asked whether she had actually managed to remove it using wet wipes. Hina confirmed that she had and wondered whether she was not supposed to do that. The HR chief was genuinely impressed. He could not believe that she had managed to remove slime extract without using a specialized remover. His curiosity about her abilities increased immediately, and he became eager to see what else she could accomplish. With the situation finally under control, the HR chief invited Hina to begin the interview. He started by asking about her awakening and confirmed that she possessed a cleaning-related ability. Hina carefully explained that her class was actually housekeeper, making it clear that her abilities were not simply related to ordinary cleaning. The HR chief acknowledged that the class was certainly unusual. He explained that even General Manager Wumina had spoken highly of Hina's abilities and described them as remarkable. He also admitted that after seeing the photographs Hina had brought with her, he initially struggled to believe that the before and after images showed the same house. The difference was so extreme that it looked as though the entire property had been replaced. At the same time, he pointed out that the housekeeper class did not appear to have any obvious combat application. Hina listened carefully, but then something else caught her attention. She suddenly realized that Wumina was not simply an ordinary hunter. The HR chief had referred to her as General Manager Wumina, which meant that the person Hina had casually started calling Uni held a major management position within the Blue Dragon Guild. Hina remembered how everyone in the building had respectfully greeted Mina and finally understood why. She had known that Mina was powerful, but she had not realized that she was also a high-ranking leader within the organization. The HR chief explained that becoming a team leader was not determined solely by combat rank. While having enough strength to clear dungeons was important, leadership ability, teamwork, communication, and the ability to calmly judge situations were even more important for someone responsible for leading other people. According to him, General Manager Wumina excelled in exactly those areas. She was a capable leader who understood how to manage people and situations effectively, which was why she held such an important position within the guild. Hina was genuinely impressed by this revelation. She already thought Mina was an amazing person after being saved by her, receiving her recommendation, and enjoying an incredible meal together, but now she discovered that Mina was also an accomplished leader within one of the world's most powerful guilds. Hina could not help thinking that she had become surprisingly close to such an extraordinary person. She also jokingly thought that since she had managed to grill so much delicious meat for Mina, she should probably grill even more for her in the future. The HR chief then moved on with the interview and asked whether Hina would be able to begin working from the following Monday. Hina was stunned by the question because she had not even realized that the interview was already over. She looked at the time and realized that less than 10 minutes had passed. She could not believe that the HR chief had already made a decision after such a short conversation. He explained that an experienced interviewer could judge many important qualities within a short amount of time, especially when the candidate came with a strong recommendation and clear evidence of their abilities. Hina's recommendation from General Manager Wumina carried significant weight because Mina was known for having excellent judgment when it came to people. The HR chief also pointed out that Hina's evidence was unusually convincing. The before and after photographs of her house demonstrated a level of cleaning ability that was difficult to fake, and her actions earlier in the corridor provided even more evidence of how effective her skills were. He also mentioned the encounter with Kong Jinhyun. Despite the absurdity of what had happened, Hina had remained calm when faced with an S-class hunter who had casually torn a piece of concrete out of the floor. Rather than panicking or blaming him, she had even attempted to cover for him and explain that he had been trying to help her. The HR chief saw this as another positive sign because it demonstrated that Hina could remain composed even when faced with an extremely intimidating situation. He concluded that she was highly recommended for the position. Hina was still trying to process how quickly everything had happened. Only a short while ago, she had been standing outside with one shoe stuck to the floor, wondering whether the interview would even happen. Now she had apparently passed the interview and had been offered a position at the Blue Dragon Guild. The HR chief formally welcomed her and expressed his appreciation for having the opportunity to recruit someone with such unusual talent. He reached out his hand toward Hina, offering it as a gesture of welcome and acceptance. Hina looked at his hand in surprise, finally beginning to realize that her desperate search for a stable job might have come to an end far sooner than she ever expected. Her strange housekeeper awakening, which initially seemed like the worst possible class she could have received, had somehow led her directly to one of the most prestigious organizations in Korea. What she had thought was a useless ability might actually be the beginning of an entirely new life. As Hina opens the can of food, FCC immediately reminds her that drinking for 2 days in a row is not good for her, but Hina ignores the warning and happily takes a drink, enjoying how refreshing it feels. After everything she has been through recently, she feels that she deserves a proper break, especially since days like this are perfect for enjoying some chamek. Other than the fact that she cannot properly furnish Home Sweet Home with everything she wants, life is slowly beginning to feel manageable again. She cannot simply buy furniture and other household items the same way she bought groceries earlier, but she decides not to worry about that for now. She looks at the food in front of her and prepares to enjoy her meal. Just as she is about to take her first bite, she thinks about her older brother and wishes that he could have been there to celebrate with her. She remembers that if Appa had been around, the two of them could have celebrated everything that had happened together. However, it has already been almost 3 weeks since he entered the dungeon, and Hina cannot stop wondering when the seemingly endless rain outside will finally stop. People always say that no news is good news, but in her situation, there has been absolutely no news from her brother at all. She tries to reassure herself that he is probably fine, but the longer she goes without hearing anything, the more difficult it becomes to remain calm. Suddenly, another thought occurs to her. Since Home Sweet Home is her own personal space, she wonders whether other people can enter it as well. If Appa cannot enter the house, then having such an incredible skill would be almost pointless for her because she desperately wants to share this place with him. She asks FCC whether family members can be brought inside, and the housing manager explains that family members are permitted to move into the house and that invitations are also allowed. Hina immediately feels relieved by this information. Knowing that her Appa can eventually enter Home Sweet Home gives her another reason to feel hopeful. She imagines how shocked he will be when he learns that she somehow obtained an entire house for free after awakening as a housekeeper. She smiles to herself at the thought and decides to stop worrying for the moment. The food is getting cold, so she tells herself to eat while it is still hot. FCC immediately warns her to be careful because she is spilling food, but Hina is too focused on enjoying the meal. She takes another bite and happily concludes that chicken really is the best. The taste is incredible, and the quality is better than she expected. After finally filling her stomach, Hina leans back and decides that it is time to examine the skills she has acquired before beginning her new job. She opens the blue status banner and starts going through her abilities one by one. The first skill she examines is Comfortable Bed, which allows her to create a comfortable bed where she can enjoy a safe and quiet rest without interference from other beings. She then checks Plucking Herbs, which allows her to classify plants and identify which ones are edible before plucking them. Next comes Home Sweet Home, the ability that provides a home to the skill user. After that is Best Extermination, which is described as an ability capable of eradicating every existence that threatens peace within the home. She continues reading and reaches Nifty Fingers, which is described as a skill that allows everyone to receive satisfaction from her meticulous handiwork. Then there's Rice Power, the skill that allows stamina to come from the power of rice, restoring the user's depleted stamina through food containing rice. Finally, she reaches this as the Taste of My Magic Touch, which allows her to create the best possible flavor through the magic touch of her cooking. Hina notices that almost all of her skills are D-ranked, with the exception of Plucking Herbs. She then looks at the mastery of Nifty Fingers and becomes surprised by how high it has already become. Considering that she has only been using it for cleaning, the mastery has increased at a surprisingly fast rate. She begins wondering whether the fact that Nifty Fingers is a passive skill means that its effects can also be applied when she uses her other housekeeper skills. However, when she checks Best Extermination, she notices something extremely strange. The skill description says that it eradicates all existences that threaten peace within the home, but its mastery is showing a shocking negative value of -100. Hina stares at the number in confusion and wonders whether she has ever actually used the skill. She has no memory of intentionally activating it. Suddenly, FCC notices her expression and seems to remember something. Hina then recalls the incident from when she first entered the house. She had seen what she thought was a bug and immediately kicked at it without thinking, only to discover later that the supposed bug was actually FCC. At that time, Best Extermination had automatically activated because she had attacked the housing manager. Hina suddenly remembers the incident and becomes horrified. She apologizes to FCC, explaining that she genuinely did not know the skill had been activated back then. However, she cannot understand why her mastery has been reduced all the way to -100. She wonders whether the penalty is because she attacked FCC specifically rather than an actual bug. From her perspective, a snail is still something she would normally encounter outside, so she cannot understand why the system would treat the situation so seriously. FCC becomes furious at the comparison and makes it very clear that it is not an ordinary snail. It is the house manager, the house fairy, and the being responsible for managing Home Sweet Home. Hina immediately realizes that she has made an even bigger mistake by insulting the housing manager without thinking. FCC declares that attacking the house manager carries a major penalty, and Hina begins apologizing repeatedly. She admits that kicking FCC was wrong, but she also realizes that she made matters worse by making thoughtless remarks and even comparing the housing manager to an ordinary snail. She sincerely reflects on her actions and begs for forgiveness. She knows that losing 100 mastery points is already an enormous penalty and understands that she made a genuinely serious mistake. Unfortunately for Hina, FCC does not believe that the punishment is severe enough. The housing manager decides that an additional punishment is required. Hina becomes nervous and asks what that punishment could possibly involve. FCC then announces the punishment and immediately changes the wallpaper of the entire house. Hina stares in horror as the walls suddenly become covered in an overwhelmingly floral pattern. The entire interior is transformed without warning, and Hina cannot believe what she is seeing. She had been hoping for some kind of minor punishment, but instead the house fairy has completely destroyed the interior design she had worked so hard to create. Even the wallpaper now has an excessively bright and strange combination of flowers that clashes horribly with everything else. Hina immediately protests, explaining that she does not like the new wallpaper and finds the entire design unbearable. FCC continues with the punishment, and the house's interior begins changing even further. Hina watches in horror as the place turns into what she considers a ghastly hybrid interior design. She cannot understand how things have gone this far. To make matters worse, she suddenly notices mold appearing again. Hina becomes completely desperate. She begs FCC to stop ruining the house and promises that she will never make the same mistake again. Her desperation becomes so intense that she actually gets down in front of the snail and begs for mercy. She cannot believe that she has reached the point where a human being is sincerely pleading with a snail, but she has no other choice. She becomes deeply emotional and openly reflects on her mistake, admitting that she was wrong and asking FCC to forgive her. After hearing her sincere apology, FCC finally accepts it. Hina immediately becomes relieved and thanks FCC repeatedly. However, after looking around at the newly decorated interior, she begins to realize just how much she misses the original dirty wallpaper. The situation has become so ridiculous that she even imagines having nightmares about being crushed to death by giant flowers while sleeping. She begs FCC to return the house to its previous state, asking whether there is any possible way to reverse the punishment. She pleads with the housing manager and even gives it an overly respectful title, calling it the Great House Manager and Housing Fairy Master Snail FCC in the hope that flattering it will somehow convince it to help. Unfortunately, FCC explains that it cannot restore the house using its own abilities. Hina is stunned by this answer and cannot understand what it means. She asks what FCC means by impossible and becomes increasingly confused when the housing manager refuses to give her a proper solution. Suddenly, another blue banner appears before her. The unexpected notification startles Hina, and she immediately wonders what has happened. The banner announces that a hidden quest has been unlocked. The quest is titled the DIY Interior Design Quest. Hina stares at the notification in disbelief. She cannot believe that this is how she has obtained her very first quest. Instead of receiving a quest through some grand dungeon event or dangerous mission, she has unlocked one because she made her own house look terrible and desperately wants to fix it. She is not even sure whether she should feel happy about finally receiving a quest. She examines the details carefully and notices that the quest is strangely specific while still giving her a considerable amount of freedom in how she completes it. Usually, failing a quest would result in some kind of severe penalty, but this one appears to have no time limit at all. Hina considers that a major advantage. Since there is no deadline, she can take her time and work on the house properly instead of rushing. She decides that even if the quest had not appeared, she would still need to restore the interior because there is no way she can continue living in the house like this. She therefore decides that it is actually a decent quest. FCC agrees with her assessment and seems pleased that she has finally received a proper challenge. Hina immediately warns the housing manager not to say anything that might anger her again. She does not want another punishment or another terrible interior change. She checks the date and realizes that it is Tuesday. Since she is scheduled to start working at Blue Dragon the following Monday, she still has roughly a week to complete the quest. That gives her plenty of time to deal with the house properly. She rolls up her sleeves and decides that the first thing she needs to handle is the mold. She prepares herself to begin the restoration, but FCC immediately reminds her that proper equipment is necessary. Hina reluctantly agrees and remembers the housekeeper outfit requirement. Wearing the proper items increases the efficiency of all her skills by 50%, so she decides that she might as well take advantage of the bonus. She remembers that she received a mold extermination solution as one of her earlier level rewards and decides that now is the perfect time to use it. While preparing the solution, Hina thinks about how convenient it would be if she had a proper inventory where she could store ordinary items. Unfortunately, the system's storage function is extremely limited. The only items that can be stored are objects provided by the system, items obtained from dungeons, or byproducts created through dungeon-related materials. Ordinary household purchases cannot simply be placed into an inventory whenever she wants. She considers this inconvenient but decides not to waste any more time thinking about it. She has a job waiting for her next week, and she wants to finish restoring the house before then. Just as she prepares to start spraying the mold extermination solution, she accidentally moves as though she is about to hit FCC again. The housing manager immediately reacts in fear and demands that she stop. Hina quickly realizes what happened and explains that she does not intend to attack FCC. She simply wants to make sure that she does not accidentally hurt it again, so she moves FCC into another room before beginning the cleaning process. Once FCC is safely away from the area, Hina puts on a mask to protect herself from the strong chemicals. She begins spraying the mold extermination solution throughout the affected areas of the house. The product instructions explain that it takes approximately 15 minutes for the solution to produce its full effect and warn that the chemicals are harmful to the human body. Hina therefore needs to ventilate the area properly after allowing the solution to work for 15 minutes. She quickly realizes that the extermination solution is much stronger than she expected. The smell is intense, and she begins coughing almost immediately. She decides that it is better to finish spraying quickly and then leave the room so that the house can ventilate properly. She opens the door and steps away from the treated area. As she looks outside, she notices that the weather appears completely normal at first. The sight of the outside world seems strangely peaceful compared to the chaotic interior of the house. Hina thinks about how the entire process almost feels like CBRN training because she has to wear protective equipment, handle dangerous chemicals, and ventilate the contaminated area afterward. She opens the door further and looks outside again. However, this time, something catches her attention. She notices something extremely unusual beyond the doorway. Her expression changes immediately, and she instinctively closes the door. She stands there in shock, trying to understand what she just saw. She wonders whether exhaustion is causing her to hallucinate. Perhaps she has simply been working too hard and is imagining things. She takes a breath and decides to open the door again, determined to confirm whether what she saw was real. When the door opens once more, there is no possibility of misunderstanding what is happening. The world outside Home Sweet Home is nothing like the ordinary surroundings she expected. Instead, she sees an enormous winter landscape filled with snow-covered mountains and violent weather. She is completely stunned. Snow is falling outside, and the landscape stretches far beyond anything she could have imagined. Lightning flashes across the sky, enormous mountains rise in the distance, and wild creatures can be seen moving throughout the frozen environment. There are wolves, giant eagles, and even polar bears roaming through the snowy wilderness. Hina stares at the scene in complete disbelief. She cannot understand why the outside of her house has suddenly become a frozen wilderness. Her mind immediately jumps to the most terrifying possibility. She wonders whether the area outside the door is actually another dungeon. If so, then Home Sweet Home may not simply be a safe house. It may have some kind of connection to an entirely separate environment filled with dangerous monsters and extreme conditions. Hina remains frozen at the doorway, staring at the mountains, snow, lightning, and monsters outside, unable to comprehend what she has just discovered. The house that she originally thought was merely a strange D-rank skill may be hiding far more secrets than she ever imagined. Bang! Hina immediately slams the door shut and stands there completely speechless, staring at it as though she has just seen something that should not exist. Her mind is still trying to process the frozen mountains, lightning, snow, and countless monsters she had just witnessed on the other side. She realizes that she needs to get away from the door immediately and begins backing away from it, convinced that she has somehow placed herself in an incredibly dangerous situation. Just as she starts moving, FCC suddenly shouts a warning that something is behind her. Hina jumps in fright and turns around, startled by the sudden appearance of the housing manager. She cannot understand how FCC managed to appear behind her without making any sound and wonders how it was able to come out of nowhere like that. FCC casually explains that, As the house manager, it is capable of doing practically anything within Home Sweet Home. It then reminds Hina that the room still needs proper ventilation because of the mold extermination solution she sprayed earlier. FCC moves toward the door with the intention of opening it, but Hina immediately panics and picks it up before it can touch the handle. She desperately stops FCC and explains that there are countless monsters outside and that the area beyond the door is a dungeon. FCC responds as though this is the most obvious thing in the world. Hina is stunned by the answer and cannot believe that FCC already knew the truth. She begins asking whether this means that Home Sweet Home is actually located inside a dungeon. FCC confirms that this is indeed the case. Hina becomes even more confused and starts putting the pieces together. If the house is inside a dungeon, then how had she never realized it before? FCC explains that Home Sweet Home is connected to dungeons, meaning that the space is not located in the ordinary world at all. Instead, it can connect to different dungeons depending on the circumstances. Hina realizes the terrifying implication of this information. Her house is not simply located inside one dungeon. It is connected to all dungeons, meaning that whenever she opens the door without having a specific destination in mind, the door can randomly connect to a dungeon. She is horrified by the thought. The idea of accidentally opening her front door and finding herself standing in front of a dungeon full of monsters is enough to make her question whether she can safely live there at all. FCC confirms that her understanding is correct. Hina immediately becomes convinced that Home Sweet Home is far more dangerous than she originally thought. She begins remembering the skill description and the fact that Home Sweet Home has a safe radius of 2 meters. She realizes that the skill's safety function may be the only thing protecting her from the dangers outside. Even though the house itself is supposed to be safe, the moment she steps beyond its protected boundary, she could potentially be exposed to whatever monsters happen to be occupying the dungeon connected to the door. Hina decides that she cannot simply remain in the house without understanding how the safety system works. She considers taking all of her belongings out immediately and abandoning the house altogether. If she cannot safely enter and leave her own home, then what is the point of having it? She becomes frustrated by the entire situation and feels as though she was tricked into accepting something far more dangerous than she understood. FCC, however, calmly points out another important rule. Entry into Home Sweet Home is free, but exiting is not free. Hina immediately feels betrayed by the wording. She begins complaining that she was essentially deceived by a false offer. The house had been presented to her as a reward, but now she is discovering that there are conditions attached to it that she had never been told about. She is already suspicious of the system, and this revelation makes her even more determined not to lower her guard. Despite her concerns, Hina eventually decides that she needs to understand the safety system properly instead of panicking. She takes FCC with her and steps outside into the dungeon environment to investigate. The moment she leaves the house, she is surrounded by the strange forest landscape. She asks FCC where they're going and immediately reminds it that the area is extremely dangerous. However, she insists that she needs to prove the safety function for herself. FCC points out that the 2-meter radius around Home Sweet Home is designated as a safe zone. Hina looks around carefully and finally notices that there is an actual boundary line marking the protected area. She cannot believe that the line had been there all along without her noticing it. At least now she has a clear indication of where the safe zone ends. Even after learning this, however, Hina still feels that FCC has some suspicious tendencies. She points out that the housing manager never told her any of this information until she happened to discover it herself. She cannot shake the feeling that FCC and the system work together to push this house onto her without giving her all the necessary details. Hina decides that she absolutely cannot let her guard down around the housing manager. She may be grateful for the house and everything it has provided, but she has already learned that there are hidden conditions and unexpected consequences behind almost every benefit. As she begins making her way back toward the house, Hina reflects on the strange situation. She still cannot believe that she can literally have a dungeon view from her own home. Never in her life would she have imagined that her front door could open directly into a monster-filled dungeon. It is an absurd situation, but there is ultimately nothing she can do about it. She has no other choice but to adapt. From now on, she decides that whenever she opens the door, she must have a clear destination in mind. That way, she can avoid accidentally connecting the house to a random dungeon. The situation reminds her of the old saying that there is no such thing as a free lunch. Everything comes with a price, and apparently her free house comes with a rather terrifying one. Hina then remembers another concern and asks FCC about the fixed position of the dungeon-facing door. She wonders what would happen if hunters happened to discover the entrance to Home Sweet Home while exploring a dungeon. If someone found the mysterious house sitting inside a dungeon, it could potentially expose everything about her ability. FCC reassures her that finding the house would be extremely difficult because locating a specific house within a dungeon is essentially like finding a needle in a haystack. Hina immediately feels relieved by that information. As long as she does not recklessly step outside and reveal herself, the chances of other hunters discovering Home Sweet Home should remain incredibly low. She then checks the time and realizes that approximately 15 minutes have passed since she sprayed the mold extermination solution. She asks FCC whether the ventilation should be sufficient by now and whether they can safely return inside. FCC confirms that enough time has passed and that the ventilation is now sufficient. The two of them return toward the house and step back inside. Hina is curious to see whether the extermination solution actually worked. She opens the door and looks around. The moment she sees the interior, her eyes widen in amazement. The mold has completely disappeared, and every treated surface is now sparkling clean. The walls are so clean that the bright floral wallpaper somehow stands out even more than before. Hina is impressed by how effective the extermination solution was, but she still cannot understand why the wallpaper has to be so vibrant and excessively bright. She knows that she cannot continue living with such an overwhelming design. She immediately decides that she needs to deal with the wallpaper before going to sleep. If she leaves it as it is, she fears that she will end up having nightmares about being buried alive under flowers. Hina considers looking up a store online and buying whatever materials she needs. Since it is still late at night, she assumes that there must be at least one store open somewhere that can provide what she needs. She begins working on the wallpaper herself, determined to fix the interior before her first day at Blue Dragon. As she starts painting, the familiar blue banner appears once again. Her passive skill Nifty Fingers has automatically activated. The skill recognizes her meticulous movements and begins assisting her with the task. Every inch of the wall that a roller touches is covered with paint in a remarkably smooth and precise manner. Hina is surprised by how easily the work progresses. She asks FCC what it thinks of the new color as she continues painting. She eventually covers the entire wall in yellow, creating a much calmer and more pleasant atmosphere than the previous floral design. FCC appears very satisfied with the result, and Hina agrees that choosing yellow was a good decision. She admits that her favorite color is actually green, but as soon as she looks outside toward the forest, she remembers why she has developed a strange trauma toward the color. The first dungeon she entered was filled with terrifying green scenery and a giant dinosaur that nearly ate her alive. Ever since then, the color green has been associated with monsters and survival instincts in her mind. Hina jokes to herself that she has somehow lost her love for green because of that experience. Despite being a complete beginner at painting walls, she is surprised by how quickly she managed to finish the job. She had expected the process to take much longer, but the Nifty Fingers skill made the work considerably easier. She carefully peels away the masking tape and checks the edges of the newly painted wall. The paint has been applied incredibly neatly, with almost no visible mistakes. Because she kept the door open while painting, the smell is not as overwhelming as she expected either. Hina even realizes that she has become somewhat accustomed to the sounds of monsters outside. The distant howls and strange noises no longer frighten her as much as they once did. She remembers how the barking of dogs from her old neighborhood used to be an ordinary sound in her life, and now the monster noises outside have somehow become part of the background of her new home. Just as she finishes admiring the completed wall, the blue banner suddenly appears again. It congratulates her and announces that the basic one-out studio has reached level 6. Hina is stunned by the sudden level up. Before she can fully process it, another notification immediately appears, announcing that the studio has reached level 7. She stares at the banner in disbelief. The house has somehow increased by 2 levels almost at once. Hina cannot believe that all of her recent cleaning and interior design work has produced such a dramatic result. She realizes that this is something new because she has never experienced the house leveling up twice in such a short period before. She barely has time to celebrate before the system informs her that another reward is available for leveling up. Naturally, Hina accepts the reward immediately. She has no reason to refuse when there is a chance of receiving another useful household item. As the system begins loading, Hina hopes that this time she will receive something especially valuable. She quietly wishes for a high-ranking item and waits impatiently for the result. When the lottery finally finishes, the banner reveals her reward. This time, she receives a sterilizing washing machine with pipes that do not freeze. Hina is absolutely delighted. She had been worried about how she would wash her clothes during the winter, especially because the temperatures outside are so extreme. She had even imagined herself having to hand wash everything or spend money at a laundromat. Receiving a washing machine that can operate without its pipes freezing solves a major problem for her and will save her a considerable amount of money. She happily looks at the machine and feels as though she has just received a luxury item. Alongside it, she also receives ordinary shower slippers that never slip. The slippers are surprisingly cute, and Hina finds herself becoming attached to them immediately. More importantly, they solve another problem she had been worrying about. She remembers how she had been suffering through the freezing temperatures and how uncomfortable ordinary bathroom footwear could be in such conditions. Now she can finally say goodbye to those worries. She hugs the washing machine happily and celebrates her new household equipment. FCC reminds her that sleep should happen in the bed and points out that it is already 4 in the morning. Hina finally realizes just how late it has become. She has been cleaning, painting, dealing with mold, investigating the dungeon outside, and leveling up her house throughout the night without properly noticing how much time has passed. At that moment, another blue banner appears. It explains that because of the appropriate paint color selection, brightness, and cozy atmosphere now present within the basic one-out studio, the thoughts weighing on Hina's mind have been eased, leaving her feeling more relaxed and comfortable. Hina looks around her newly improved home and realizes that the atmosphere really has changed. The house finally feels like somewhere she can live rather than somewhere she merely has to survive. She feels a quiet sense of satisfaction knowing that she managed to transform the place with her own hands. She then remembers something even more important. Starting today, she is officially a full-time employee of the Blue Dragon Guild. For the first time since awakening, Hina feels as though her life is beginning to move in a stable direction. The next morning, as she heads toward work, Wu Mina approaches from behind and greets her. Hina warmly returns the greeting and thanks her once again. Mina welcomes her into the guild and reminds her that they are essentially one family from this point onward. Hina promises to take her new position seriously and asks Mina to continue taking care of her. Internally, however, Hina still cannot believe that she is actually an employee of Blue Dragon. Everything has happened so quickly that the situation still feels unreal. Mina reassures her that she will eventually get used to it and tells her that this is now her guild as well. She especially mentions that the Cleaner Environment team has been waiting for Hina for quite some time. Hina is surprised by the wording and wonders what Mina means by saying they have been waiting for her forever. She does not have much time to think about it because they need to clock in and officially begin the workday. Hina decides that seeing everything for herself is the best way to understand her new workplace. The two women enter the building together, and Hina prepares herself for her first day. Once inside, the HR chief instructs her to carefully review the employment contract and sign it. Hina reads through the document and is amazed by the terms. After spending so much time working overtime at her previous company, she is now looking at a proper full-time employment contract with significantly better conditions. She is especially impressed by the salary, benefits, and employee protection. The benefits are far better than what she had expected, and she realizes that this is exactly the kind of stable employment she had been searching for. She asks the HR chief where she needs to sign, and he directs her to the appropriate section. Once everything is signed, the HR chief welcomes her officially and prepares to introduce her to the department where she will be working. Just then, someone knocks on the office door. The HR chief invites the person inside, and the Cleaner Environment team leader, Kim Hwa-soon, enters the room. She greets the HR chief before turning her attention toward Hina. The HR chief introduces Hina as the new employee who will be joining the Cleaner Environment team starting that day. He then introduces Kim Hwa-soon as the team's leader and explains that she will be responsible for showing Hina the details of her new job and teaching her everything she needs to know about the work. Kim Hwa-soon welcomes Hina warmly and explains that she has already heard quite a lot about her. She expresses her anticipation about working with Hina and hopes they can cooperate well. Hina politely introduces herself as Lee Hina and asks Kim Hwa-soon to take good care of her from now on. Kim Hwa-soon then prepares to take Hina with her so that she can begin learning about the Cleaner Environment team and the responsibilities that come with the position. As Hina leaves the HR chief's office with her new team leader, the HR chief watches them depart. Once they are gone, he quietly reflects on the new recruit. He has high expectations for Hina and believes that she may prove to be far more valuable to the Blue Dragon Guild than anyone initially expected. Her unusual housekeeper abilities, her calm temperament, her recommendation from General Manager Wu Mina, and the evidence of her extraordinary cleaning skills have all left a strong impression on him. For now, however, Hina is completely unaware of how much attention her seemingly useless D-ranked housekeeper class has already attracted within the Blue Dragon Guild.